Our house, in the middle of our street, our house, is a dark mirror upon which stands the reflection of the abyssal nature of the soul, silent and alone. Gazing deeper, begin to see that the safety you rely on, the safety it provides, is invariably, inevitably ripped from your fingers. Where do you turn when that safety you so desperately relied on is sundered by the very thing that offered that protection in the first place? Our house. Here we are.
What?
Here we are.
Well, I think this might be a first for the In the Buff podcast canon. We have a bit of a book club episode.
A book club. And only 2 people read it, and only one of them really read it.
But I think we'll all have some meaningful things to contribute to the discussion.
Except for John.
John, I have faith in you.
What's a book?
Before we get into it, let's get into the comments. I think this is going to be a girthy episode.
Thick.
So let's get all of the necessities out of the way post-haste.
All the bare necessities?
Chris, you said you wanted to take on comments?
Oh, please no.
You're the one who said it, dog.
You did say that.
Please don't make me.
Okay.
Well,
We're
I don't
making
have
it.
them up,
Oh,
so I
okay.
can't do them.
Hold on.
I got you, Chris. You fucking failure.
John will be your parachute, as he is all our parachutes.
They're all Final Fantasy related. I just want to get into the book club.
Okay.
So, I watched The Flash the other day, the new one,
Mm-hmm.
and it was okay. It was pretty good. So I thought we could talk about that.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
a bit of a
I didn't read
reversal
that
here.
either. Fuck.
No, we're not talking about that, okay? I can't even keep it up. I wish I were joking. I am a little bit shivery and I feel weird. I feel like I'm having a fight or flight response recording this podcast because I know we're about to talk about this book.
What are
So-
you feeling? Fight or flight?
I don't know. I haven't decided.
I
guess.
usually freeze.
Well, I think we're
I
gonna
would
have.
like to say that. I'm freezing right now, but I'm not. I'm actually full of motion.
It's
I'm
cold in that
emoting
hallway.
a lot. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about this book. Obviously, I've been reading it a lot. I've read it 3 times in the month or so that I've had it from the library, and I just want to say this to the listener and to you guys. I genuinely mean this. Okay, I know this sounds hyperbolic. If you are at all intrigued by the amount of preamble and the kind of things I've been dropping at all, and you haven't finished it yet, or you haven't even begun to read it if you're a listener, then just leave the podcast. Go read the book, and there's going to be 2 other times throughout this retelling. I'm going to spoil the whole fucking thing. There's going to be 2 times throughout this retelling where I stop and say, hey, it's about to get crazy. Go read the book if you're at all interested. Because this is unlike any book I have ever read. And I don't even know if it's a good thing, but it's a very novel thing, and it's a very unique experience.
I am one of the other people who have at least could say I got somewhere near finishing the book. I would go so far as to say this book is a masterpiece, but I wouldn't say it's in a good way.
I was blown away simply by the way the story was presented to me. The story itself, you can think of whatever you want.
I think we can all agree that as a concept, I don't think any of us have ever encountered a book quite like this.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. This was a first for me.
Great. That's great, John. You have never read a book.
I read The Hunger Games in 2012.
That's great. I thought you watched the movie. You're just confusing yourself.
Oh.
Well, before we get any further, because this is so avant-garde and meta, and experimental, everybody all right back there?
That dumbass fucking kitten.
The one you kidnapped?
Catnapped. He catnapped it.
Catnapped.
Just knocked over a box of like 1,000 Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
Unfortunate. So, because this book is so avant-garde and experimental, I think right from jump, we need to establish what it is we're even talking about here.
Right.
And this is kind of going to be the foundation that the rest of our analysis is going to be built upon. So, we are talking about the book House of Leaves. In real life, House of Leaves.
In real life, written by the real life person Mark Z. Danielewski.
Yep, the book in my hand was written by Mark Danielewski in the year 2000. Now, that's where things diverge. This is where
Let's
things
just
start.
forget Mark Z. Danielewski exists.
In the meta-narrative of the novel, House of Leaves, this book in my hand, this book is a manuscript called House of Leaves, written by a man named Zampano, about a fictional but culturally significant documentary. That manuscript was then found by a man named Johnny Truant, who edited and published that manuscript into the book in my hands. A third contributor, only referred to as the editors, but I think it's implied to be Danielewski, works
Sure.
at the publishing house Johnny Truant sent the manuscript to and added additional comments. So already we have 4 levels of authorship in this book, 2 of them being the same person.
And I'm just gonna spoil a brief thing here. It might literally all be horseshit.
Right.
I have that in my notes. We'll get to it.
So, we're just gonna start. It starts with an intro from Johnny. Johnny is a total fucking degenerate.
Mhm.
He is he works at a tattoo shop. He like welds pins and he doodles, but I don't even know if they use the doodles for the tattoos. I think he just likes to doodle. But
He's an apprentice. He was being trained to be a tattoo artist, and his boss is like, "There's no way you're ever going to be good enough." Just
they have him weld the pins together.
yeah,
the,
man the front desk,
the
weld the
tattoo
pins.
And he has a friend named Lude. Lude comes up a lot. It's pretty much his only friend.
He is a hairstylist, and he is kind of a mid-level socialite in the LA party scene.
He's like a Kato Kalin. I was mentioning Kato Kalin before we even started recording. He's one of these guys who's just like around, and you get the impression that he has a connect to everything.
Yep. If any kind of drugs, any kind of party, he knows how to get it to you.
And he's usually dragging Johnny along with him to these parties and these experiences.
And that's good that you say dragging. Like, it does seem, especially as we get deeper into the book, it does seem like I guess I should go just for Lude's sake, like that kind of thing. And that pretty much is good. Anyway, Lude lives in a building with a man named Zampano, and Lude finds him dead one day. And so he brings Johnny to Zampano's room, where they find this manuscript that Cody mentioned before. And the room itself is totally, like, dark, and there's candles, but they're all burnt out. Or, that's the thing, there's candles, but none of them have been lit.
Yep.
And there's, like, where his body was, there are, like, 4 claw marks in the floor. And he has a fridge filled with, like, books and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the corner, an unassuming box that is filled with this manuscript that something about it grabs Johnny's attention, and he decides to take it, and it is now his. To talk about a little bit about Zampano, what we know about him, he was a very old man, like 85, I don't remember the exact age, and he was blind. He's been blind for the past 50 years. And that's an important fact, because Zampano, this manuscript we're going to find out, is about a movie that, as far as Johnny is concerned, does not exist, has never existed, and nobody knows about it. And he's blind? How could he have watched this movie? But he's writing about it in such a way that it is real to him.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that Zampano watched.
It very much goes into almost like an academic deconstruction of this movie.
Like
Yeah.
a literary analysis.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which is where we get into all the footnotes
Right.
of all these fake
Well,
sources.
before we get into that, I just wanted to read this little snippet from the intro. This is a note that Johnny found in the manuscript that Zampano had written. Whoever finds and publishes this work shall be entitled to all proceeds. I ask only that my name take its rightful place. Perhaps you will even prosper. If, however, you discover that readers are less than sympathetic and choose to dismiss this enterprise out of hand, then may I suggest you drink plenty of wine and dance in the sheets of your wedding night, for whether you know it or not, now you truly are prosperous. They say truth stands the test of time. I can think of no greater comfort than knowing this document failed such a test. implying, to me at least, Zampano had to just, like, get this out. And, like, he thought that maybe that would fix him or something. He had to get it onto paper and out of his head, and he hoped that it would just die there.
What's also interesting about that last sentence is he says, "The truth always stands the test of time. I hope this endeavor fails."
Yeah.
Which to me seems to imply that this manuscript is not true.
Yeah.
Right? Or at the very least, he hopes it's not true.
But as we come to find out for the rest of the book, he almost has a zealous defense of this documentary. And the documentary in question is a home movie called The Navidson Record, created by a fictitious but real, in the context of the book, photographer named William
Pulitzer
Navidson.
Prize-winning photographer.
He's a Pulitzer Prize, very famous photographer, and for about a year after he retired, he set up cameras in his family's house and started, like, filming short little moments of their life in this new house. And things escalate from there.
So I'm going to start. This is where the Navidson record, at the intro stops, the Navidson record begins by Zampano. Navidson, like he just said, he decided after he retired, let's make like a little home movie, basically, that him and Karen are having marriage troubles. Karen is his wife, and they have a
They're not
son and a
specifically
daughter.
married. That is brought up a lot.
Oh, aren't they?
They are not specifically married until after the events of the Navidson
Oh,
record.
well, there you go. They call him her wife a lot.
They do. They act like husband and wife, but they specifically call out a lot that they are not married, and specifically it is Karen's onus is behind that. She's the one refusing.
So they have a son and daughter named Chad and Daisy, and Chad's the older one. They're both like less than 7, and they want to film because there's been a strain in their relationship. Navidson and they call him Navidson, so interchangeably I'll call him Navidson and Will. There's been a strain in their relationship, Navidson and Karen, and he was hoping that them just moving out into the suburbs and having a nice little house and nice little suburban life would bring them together. And for the most part, in the first 3 or 4 days, it was working pretty well. They were having a nice little time, and he seemed really content and happy. Karen does bring up at one point that he mentions Delisle. There's a name that keeps coming up that Will says named Delisle, and she immediately assumes Delisle must be some long-lost love, and we don't really know who Delisle is. Also, just bear this in mind, it's going to happen in the podcast as well. Johnny's just going to interject. Our John and the book's John is just going to randomly interject sometimes to say something that usually means nothing. Usually is just totally useless and serves no purpose other than to just give us an update on what's going on with John. John, what's going on with you?
Is that true?
Like, yes, it's in there.
Is that what I do?
That is what you do, yeah.
Oh.
I think the first time that this happens in the book is incredibly important for the reader moving forwards about how they're supposed to approach this book.
Right.
At a certain point in the first chapter, Navidson and Karen are talking about something. Navidson has just gotten back to the house from going into town, and they have this short conversation at the end of this chapter where Karen says, "Hey, the hot water heater's on the fritz," she manages to say. "When did that happen?" She accepts his brief kiss. "I guess last night." And then there is a, no joke, 6-page footnote where
From Johnny.
Johnny basically says, "I woke up this morning and my hot water heater was also broken. That's really unfortunate because I was planning on going to a party with Lude tonight, and I just kept waiting for the hot water to come and it never came, so I had to take a cold shower. And then once we got to the club, we were chatting up these hotties who were at the bar, and Lude got me making up this, like, bullshit story to try and impress them about how I was a pit boxer when I was working as a merchant marine with this Russian captain, and I got in bed with, like, the mafia and some, like, fight fixers, and I lost a whole bunch of money, and then I gained it all back, and then I really spooked him." And he goes on and on and on and on like this for, no joke, 6 pages. And then, at the very end of the footnote, he says, well, all that to say is my hot water heater broke, but in the manuscript, Karen actually said that it was just their air heater that broke.
Yeah.
Right.
So I changed it. He says it. I changed it. It didn't say water heater in the original manuscript. I changed the manuscript so that it could reflect this bullshit story I just told you.
And he said to the reader, like, yeah, oh, is that a problem? You can go fuck yourself. How about that one?
And I think right here, this is a complete game changer because it shows you so many different things. It shows you, one, it proves that Johnny is a liar. It proves that Johnny is a good liar because he had everybody in that bar convinced about this story in his life that never happened. It proves that Johnny is lying to you, the reader, right now because he admits to editing Zampano's words. And it's like, now you have no certainty that the words that you're reading from Zampano are actually his words anymore.
Yeah.
And in the meta truth of that story that he told, assuming that any of it is true, Johnny, when he was telling the story, it was like the impetus behind this grand narrative about, mercenaries and pirates and a fight club or whatever the hell, was he had scars on his arms.
Mm-hmm. And he just needed to bring that up.
And he had to bring that up. I guess now we know he has scars on his arms, but he didn't go into detail about why.
Specifically, he refuses to talk about them.
He says like he's been going into the narrative, into the manuscript that Zampano wrote, like 15, 20 minutes at a time. But then we learn later on, he's like having these blackouts where suddenly 8 hours have passed and he's like, oh shit, like what the hell happened here? And we, like looking back at this now, I start to think maybe that's always been happening because he talks about how, this is later on, not a lot happens in the quote-unquote Zampano narrative for a while, and Johnny interjects again and he says he has an episode while he's at the tattoo shop, like at the tattoo shop. He's like going into the back room to get needles or some other hell, I don't know, and he like gets this sensation that he is being hunted or something. Some creepy fucking thing is happening to him and he can't even explain it. And he like has a panic attack in real time while he's writing it. And it's just really, he's very unwell.
So
he's not good.
Question. Zampano is the original author of this and Johnny is the guy that's making footnotes and editing it?
Not all the footnotes.
Yeah, not all the footnotes. So the vast majority of the footnotes are written by Zampano.
Johnny's adding in his own little narrative, I guess, make sure the reader's up to date with what the hell's going on with him. And also, the editors leave some footnotes to usually translate some stuff that Johnny was unable to translate.
Or just clarify something that Johnny said.
Right.
Or clarify that Johnny never clarifies a point that he says he's going to.
Yep.
So the dimensions are, there is a film that in the universe in the book is fake. There is an academic paper about said film. Then you have, that's by Zampano. Then you have Johnny giving us what's going on with his life, which is the actual story.
While he's going through the editing of the story that Zampano wrote.
And then we have somebody coming in and being like, clarifying.
And to really hammer this home, after I get through this point, then we can kind of start to go actually with the narrative. Zampano, throughout this whole manuscript, insists upon the reader that everything he is writing about is true and actually happened by constantly placing these footnotes, quoting critics of the film who were postulating on the meanings and motivations behind the people in the film. And even inside of the manuscript itself, he talks about how people like debate on whether or not the film was real or like it was like literal found footage or it was a work of Hollywood. Like somebody made this as like a narrative.
I definitely got the impression that Zampano, even though he is writing in this very professional academic capacity, he writes with a subtext that makes him very much feel like a fanboy.
Yeah.
That he believes wholeheartedly that the Navenson record is real, and he adds like a considerable amount of time either denouncing or straight up denying other academic criticisms of the Navidson record.
Also, he is constantly sucking Navidson's dick about how good of a photographer he
Exactly.
is.
He's
Right.
You definitely get a sense that there is a certain amount of amour in Zampano's writing. One of the footnotes that that Zampano makes is he cites a work that is critical of the Navidson record. And in one of the footnotes, Zampano says, you know, the author of this work actually makes some really good points and justifications in their criticisms. It's a shame that they're all wrong.
Yeah.
Because the criticism implies that the documentary is false, and it is absolutely true. And that's his only rebuttal.
But that's his rebuttal, but he invented this criticism in his own head.
Mm-hmm. And it was, and as far as I'm aware, at least in universe, that criticism was written by a real person.
Assuming that, we'll get to that later. We should just, like, get on with the narrative, because this
Okay.
stuff is going to come up over and over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
So, literally in my notes, I wrote, finally, it begins. The Navidsons leave their house for a wedding, and upon returning, they discover that in the master bedroom, a door has literally just appeared. A door that wasn't there before is just there. Will and Karen are, like, looking at this like, what the hell? Like,
Did we miss
they're
this?
kind of bemused. They're like, did people break into our house and then do a renovation? What the hell happened? So they check the cameras that he had put up for the sake of this home movie, and sure enough, the door just appears. Like, one frame it's not there, and the next frame it's there. They open it up, and inside are these ashen walls. They keep saying the word ashen, where it's black, but it looks like they're dusted with this gray ash. And it's like a walk-in closet that connects the children's bedroom to the master bedroom, and it was not there before. So they're like, what the hell? So this discovery prompts Navidson to begin measuring the bedroom. Just, why not? He's like, something's going on. And through some exhaustive checking and rechecking, he discovers that the inside of the bedroom is 1 quarter inch longer than it is when measured from outside the house. He doesn't know what to do. This is an impossibility in the math. He measures the outside of the house, and it's shorter than it would be on the inside of the house. So he's like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. He calls in his buddy,
His brother.
his twin brother Tom. And I wrote in my notes, they had a strained relationship, and I wrote in my notes at page 39, read joke for John. So they're driving to their house in the car, and Tom breaks the silence. Did you hear the one about the guy on the tightrope? Navidson grins. I'm glad to see some things never change. Hey, this one's true. There was this 25-year-old guy walking a tightrope across a deep river gorge, while halfway around the world, another 25-year-old guy was getting a blowjob from a 70-year-old woman. But get this, at the exact same moment, both men were thinking the exact same thought. You know what it was? No clue. Tom gives his brother a wink. Don't look down. So with Tom's help, they discover that the 1/4 inch is actually 5/16 of an inch. So they're like, well, shit. You know, I was really hoping this would clear up, because Tom's a bit of an everyman. He like gets into everything. If Will is the successful, like, pinnacle of awesome that Zampano says he is, Tom is just like a normal dude, who used to be an alcoholic and now likes to smoke weed. Also, after this is shortly the very first instance of illegible text, where Johnny says, I was unable to recover this text. I don't know what happened to it. I can't read it. So after this 5/16 inches thing happens, they call in their buddy Billy Reston, and Billy Reston has this whole history with Will, where they were in India and he lost the use of his legs from an accident, and blah, blah, blah. He's friends with Will, I guess.
I've never quite... Can somebody clarify for me real quick? Because this is one of the few places where I was unclear on what happened. Did he just get paralyzed from the waist down, or did that wire actually remove his legs?
I don't know. I really don't, because I was imagining he's in a wheelchair, obviously, but they were talking about how he, like, goes up the stairs on his arms at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was imagining him being like a half man going up the stairs.
Right.
But I don't know.
I got the impression that he was paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's what I thought at first, too. But they always just kept saying that damn wire took my legs.
this is actually a really important thing, because Zampano is writing this literary analysis of this documentary. Presumably, he has seen it, because he goes into very explicit detail about what is in this movie. But we, the reader, have not seen the Navidson record, and so all we have to go on is Zampano's description of it.
I feel like I've fucking seen it.
And here's the thing. Like, for 50% of his description, it is very academic, of just kind of like describing the events and the minutia that goes on around the movie. But for very long stretches, it's just like he's narrating a narrative rather than describing the effects of a movie.
So he's blind, obviously. He can't write this or type it himself.
I was just about to get into that.
In the story, all these people, always women.
Because he's a horny old man, apparently.
He's a horny old man. And because Johnny Truant, wants it that way. He gets all these women to dictate for him. And they're all academic people. And they all tell them this critique that you just had of, you're putting too much narrative in this. You're moving away from
one of them in particular says, hey, this seems kind of, I don't remember the names, but this seems kind of amateur what you're doing right now. And he says, he has some like quippy comeback where he says something along the lines of, basically he says sometimes the wisdom of a freshman is greater than the wisdom of a teacher. But Johnny interjects, as he always does, to tell us that he's seeking out these women that Chris just mentioned, to like help elucidate his stance on what the hell Zampano's doing. And through these encounters, he usually bangs them, and we get a clearer picture of the kind of person Zampano was. Also, at the very end of this note, lastly, we learn Johnny's father, who was a pilot and truck diver, died in an accident with his truck.
So, right there, that just adds another layer of authorship to this manuscript. That Zampano isn't even the one who wrote it.
Right.
Other characters in the story wrote it for him as he dictated it. At this point, I just want to interject. We have gotten to chapter 5, and this chapter nearly made me check out of the whole book and kind of made me hate it.
Is this the Echo?
This is the Echo.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, that is the other part, is the incredibly long, detailed diatribes he goes on that completely don't relate.
Here's the thing. So, chapter 5 starts with this sentence. It is impossible to appreciate the importance of space in the Navidson record without first taking into account the significance of echoes. Oh, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what echoes are, I am going to dedicate this entire chapter to describing what echoes are, from the ancient Greek myth of Narcissus all the way through the physical, like, mathematical formulas of how echoes propagate. There's just pages and pages of Zampano describing to you what an echo is, and he's citing all of these poets and other authors and how they have used echoes in their work and the significance of them. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. And so I just skip ahead like several pages past all this bullshit, and I see a Johnny Truant footnote, and I'm like, oh, let me see what he has to say. And he basically says, man, that was all really boring. I wouldn't blame you if you just skipped past all that.
When he interjects, that's also the first time we hear of Thumper, his perennial crush.
I hate Johnny Truant so much because he played me like a goddamn fiddle.
See, I read it because I fucking loved it. That was great.
I was
got
genuinely
so into it.
Because that's how my brain works, is I go into those long fucking winded tangents in my own head about a subject.
We know.
I know you guys know. And so that engrossed me in a way that I was like, wait, there's like 3 backwards narratives I forgot about. When that Johnny Truant footnote comes in, is like, fuck, I'm gonna go back 5 fucking, or like 20 pages and figure out what was going on that this was necessary.
This reminds me of a conversation that we have had before, where if an author sets out with the purpose of making a boring story, and you believe that it is boring, They may have succeeded in that task, but that doesn't make the story fun or interesting or exciting either.
Right.
I just got so scared that you were actually about to agree with like She-Hulk.
No,
Shulk.
no.
It's Shulk, actually.
I was so scared.
This
And,
book has changed him.
This chapter right here broke me.
Let's just forge ahead.
Mhm.
So Johnny's not doing great. Johnny's not doing okay. He meets this stripper. He does not know her real name and calls her Thumper because she has a tattoo of Thumper, the rabbit character from Bambi, over her pelvis. And he's really taken by her. She's super pretty to him. And he's like, I'm into it. And he like gets all clammy and he's like a little boy meeting his first crush. Johnny is like a 20-year-old man, like 22, by the way.
Right. Thumper is 37, right?
I think she's like
Well,
27.
I mean, age is just a number, Kyle.
I'm just saying, like,
Either way, despite their efforts, let's go back to the plot. These three men, Reston, Tom, and Will, cannot resolve the impossibility of the architecture in the house. Reston brings in all these he's like an actual contractor. He brings in all these crazy equipment and like laser measurers and shit, and he doesn't know what to do. He's like getting really frustrated, and we see that Karen and Will are growing distant with one another. Karen is having like one of these, is having none of this impossible architecture shit. She's like, I wash my hands of it. She is super claustrophobic, and just being inside the connecting hallway makes her feel weird. Between the master bedroom and the kids' bedroom. So one day, Chad and Daisy, this is what we're talking about the echoes. This is why the whole echo chapter was here. One day, Chad and Daisy are playing together, and their cries are heard echoing out of the living room, which, as we know from the first part of this chapter, is a physical impossibility because there is not enough space inside the house to create an echo.
yeah, he goes into great detail to suggest that you would need at least, I believe it was a 52-foot space
Yeah.
in order to produce any kind of an echo.
And this is where we are introduced to the very famous and the subject, basically, of this whole podcast, the 5.5-minute hallway. Karen has debilitating claustrophobia, so just looking at this 5.5-minute hallway is like, nope, I'm fucking done. I'm out. She like almost has a panic attack just looking into it and seeing that it's this tunnel that is shaped like a hallway, like it was built and just extends into darkness. And the 5.5-minute hallway was the very first short that was presented to the quote-unquote public of Zampano's reality. And in that short, we see Will holding a camera, and he's shooting an image of the 5.5-minute hallway. He backs up to the front of the house and moves to the right, and we can see a window to the right of the hallway that is the backyard. And then we see the hallway, and the hallway just extends forever, and so it's impossible. Then he goes around the house and shows that where the hallway should be is just backyard. And he goes back, and he's moving. It's just very laborious and slow, and he's really hammering home that this is not possible, and it's weird as shit. Imagine if you actually saw this in your house. What would you do? That kind of thing. So, their best course of action, Tom is just like, let's just lock the fucker up. And they close the door, I think they had to install a door,
Yeah.
and they put 4 deadbolt locks on it with keys.
This is like the kind of a door you would see in a bank, is what
Yeah.
he installed.
And Will is like so pumped. He's like, I can't believe this is happening right now. He doesn't say this out loud, but this is the what I get. He's just an adventurer at heart, and he's like, I can't believe this is happening to me. I love this. And Karen's like, I'm gonna feng shui the shit out of this. And she gets all kinds of feng shui objects to like counteract the negative energy of the house. And it's just dumb. Karen has to find some way to handle it, and that's her outlet.
Notably, we skipped a small bit. The children were playing in this hallway.
Oh yes, that's why it was echoing.
Right. The children were just playing down the hallway, seeing where it went with a little candle, which freaked them out. Karen could not enter it. Will, and this is where we see Will is great with challenging situations. Will doesn't even think. He dives headlong into this hallway, and after like maybe a minute, pulls the children out on his shoulders.
So for a while, there's like, I guess this is just the way our house is. Isn't that weird? But Will very clearly wants to enter. He wants to go in and see what's going on, and he's spooked by it, but he's like excited by it.
His entire life's goal is to document things.
Exactly. And Karen's like, fuck no, you're not doing that. And if you do that, if you go in, I'm taking the kids and leaving. And that's it. I'm gone. So one day, two people whose names are not added to the manuscript. Johnny says Zampano didn't add them in yet. Just two blank names, but we are sure that they are famous people.
It's also just completely absurd that Zampano doesn't have the names of these two guests.
Yeah.
They were said in the documentary. At some point. The fact that they are omitted is just baffling to me.
Two famous people come to their house for dinner, drinks are had, and they get a bit drunk, and Will shows them the hallway. And that totally ruins the mood. The guests look at the hallway, and one's just like, I'm out. See you later. And the other one takes like a couple steps in, he's like, okay, I'm out. and they just leave. Totally ruins the night, and she makes Will sleep on the couch. So he's sleeping on the couch, he's getting all mad, he's like, I want to explore it. And then in the documentary, cuts to black, and we just see a frame that says Exploration A, and it's Will with a little flashlight, and he's going in, and he discovers that the hallway is quite very cold. It shuffles between like 32 degrees, but plus or minus 8 degrees.
So it's potentially below freezing at any given time.
Yeah. He pushes further in and finds it's just a 70-foot long dead end. And he's like, this is it. This is what we've been so arguing about all this time. This 70-foot long dead end. And just as he turns around, there's another branching hallway that wasn't there when he first went in. And he's like, oh shit. A doorway appears, and he opens it, and he presses on into the winding corridors and passageways going back and forth, and eventually opening up into what is referred to later as the Great Hall. And it's just this huge chamber that he shines his light up, and his light doesn't reach the ceiling.
It doesn't reach the
And
far
he's like-
side.
And his light doesn't reach whatever side, the opposite side he enters from. And he's like, well, holy shit, this is crazy.
This feels like some backroom shit.
Exactly.
Yep.
Mhm.
And it happened in 2000.
It's like Black Mirror. It's like Twilight Zone. It's It's Upside Down. It's so many things.
I don't know how influential this book was. I don't know. I've never heard of it before.
Now that I've read it 3 times, I keep seeing just so many video games and shit has at the very least seems to have been inspired by this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm.
So he tries to go back, and hey, guess what? He is hopelessly fucking lost. He has no idea where he is.
'Cause
he's taken so many turns and twists.
He walked into the Great Hall. That was like the first part of it, was he walked into the Great Hall, and then he heard something.
The growl.
The growl is what it is referred to basically throughout the entire novel. He heard something and immediately jumped to look at where he thought it was, and now he doesn't remember the direction of the hallway he entered the Great Hall from.
And at one point, it's actually kind of neat. At one point, he's like in the center of the hall, and he doesn't know where he went in. So he like turns, and he goes, ah! in a direction to like hear where the echo's coming from. And I don't know, I never would have thought about that. And that's just pretty cool.
And so he has to do that trick where you just walk in a direction and hope you find a wall. And then eventually he does, and he puts down a quarter and picks a direction to see if he can find the hallway he was from, in the vain hope that maybe he will find his way out, because he is now in an empty space that he cannot see the edges of, in pitch blackness.
So he's like going corridor to corridor, doesn't know where he is, and it's starting to get like, I think I'm gonna die. Like, I think I might be stuck back here forever. But then, thank God, he hears Daisy crying from the entrance, and he follows the cries, and Daisy was having a nightmare. And because she was having a nightmare and yelling for Daddy, he was able to reach her.
I just want to say one thing. If this had ever happened to me and I came out, I would immediately think I'm in the wrong space.
Yeah.
Oh, like you came back to like a parallel dimension or something.
Yeah, I would start being like, you're not my actual daughter. You're somebody
like
else's
that.
daughter.
Maybe he did.
And I, just thinking about it, I'm freaking out.
So Johnny interjects. Isn't that great? He had yet another episode at work, much more serious this time, like a full-blown panic attack, and it happened while he was on the stairs, so he like crashes down the stairs and hurts himself. And like everybody's like, holy shit, Johnny, are you okay? And a patron points out that Johnny has bloody scratches on his neck.
Specifically, he was having an episode that suggested that there was something in the dark of the back
He was
storeroom with
being
him.
hunted.
And he says as he fell, he felt the claws of the thing that was coming for him graze the back of his neck as he fell off the
Sorry.
stairs.
And just to make sure, who was the one who was lost in this whole this
Will.
hallway?
That's in the
That was
Zampano
Will.
narrative. Will Davidson.
Yes.
So Johnny was commenting that he had the scratches.
No, Johnny was the one who was having a panic attack in a dark room after having engrossed himself in the discussions of Will Navidson and the Navidson record.
When Johnny has this episode, the patron comes up to him, and Johnny doesn't even like reply. He's like, the patron's like, "Holy shit, are you okay?" And it points out the bloody scratches. Johnny doesn't reply to him, but while writing, he thinks of what he would have responded with, and it is known some call is air am.
What?
And I think Johnny is losing his fucking mind. This is the part. Here it is. Number 1 of the, well, I guess number 2 of the parts where I say, if you are at all interested in what I've been talking about, what we've all been discussing so far, stop listening to this podcast. I implore you, go read the book.
Okay.
This goes for everyone in the podcast as well.
All right.
Go read the book, finish the book, because this is where this turned into an experience for me.
And then come back.
This was
Okay,
the last
see you guys
chapter
later.
that I read. I'm going to stick it out, though.
This is where the editors direct us to Appendix 2 to read the obituary of Johnny's father as well as his letters, the letters that his mother had sent him from an asylum. Now, I have read these letters legitimately 7 times. I love them. The first time I read them, like, I had a fight or flight response. Again, I said it again, where, like, I got to a certain point and I just felt my hackles raise. Like, I just felt weird and bad, and I didn't like it, but in the good way, like a horror movie makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not to say that these are traditionally horror-ifying, but they are to me, at the very least, I guess.
I mean, this whole book so far feels like it's striking the fears of the unknown.
Sure.
So, I had the exact opposite reaction to Scott here. This was the part where I almost started to check out. The full part where I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this book was later than this. But this was the part where I went back and read those letters. And I'm like, oh, Johnny is just crazy. And everything he says in this book and everything that Zampano may or may not have said, every single piece of this is now a work of fiction for me. This is where it completely took me out of the book. Because up until this point, I was having a fight or flight response in the basement. I do not do well with horror stuff, and the entity that I was having described to me was something that I was kind of also feeling up until this point. And then I read the letters and I'm like, oh, he's having schizophrenic attacks. And I was done.
Well, what all is in the letters?
So, I'm not going to get fully into it right now, but we learn some history for Johnny. His dad died. He was a pilot, but then he tried to get tried to renew his license or something, and
They
They-
discovered he had a heart attack.
he had a heart attack while sleeping or something, because apparently, because he hadn't realized he had had a heart attack, but they had found signs of it, so they're like, we're going to suspend you for the next 6 months. Until we get this all sorted out, see if we can renew your license. So he's like, in the meantime, I'll get a job as a truck driver, and he jackknifes and dies in the accident.
I was under the impression that he did not jackknife. The person who was instructing them had taken over the wheel and fallen asleep.
Oh, well, whatever.
In any
Either way.
case, he was in a truck accident
He's
and it
dead.
caught fire.
He's a pilot and he dies on the ground. The irony. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
So he dies, and Johnny at this point is like 6 or 7. So he goes into the foster system because his mom, before Johnny's dad had died, his mom had been sent to the Wales Toe Institute, the 3 Attic Wales Toe Institute, and because she was very unwell. And the instigating event that had sent her to the Institute was she had apparently, through the letters we learned that she had apparently tried to strangle Johnny to death at some point. And she's also the source of the scars that Johnny has on his hands. It was as simple as she was cooking and either it's left out to interpretation, but it could have been an accident. It could have just been a flare up from her unwellness. She ended up spraying him with hot boiling oil, and he tries to catch it, like as a little kid for some reason, and it just burns spiraling scars into his arms. And we see through these letters that, like, she has ebbs and flows of wellness, and it's genuinely heartbreaking to see it happen.
Yeah.
Like, she looks very cognizant. It starts out very simple. She just seems like a mom who wants to see her son.
She's certainly
she talks about how
eccentric.
she had a dream where Johnny is like a god, or he's being worshipped by gods and the gods are bringing him gifts. And so I'm just thinking, like, I think she has delusions of grandeur around her son. Also, it gets weirdly sexual with her son, but not in like an overt way. That's something I picked up on. Maybe I'm the pervert.
It certainly feels that way. Like that's a thing that could potentially have been going on.
Which,
Yeah.
now that I think about it, these letters, we will get to that. We will get back to that. Continue on.
We'll get to it because it is an important part at the end.
Yeah.
So the letters don't matter right now?
They do. What I just told you, man.
They inform you of Johnny's genetic history of some kind of mental illness.
And also, there will be times where Johnny refers to something, also in my notes, where I'll refer to something that we wouldn't know if it weren't for those letters.
Correct.
Alright.
So, this is just like a weird thing. I don't really know why it's in the book, to be honest. We discovered that for some reason, animals are rejected by the hallway. They have a dog and a cat, and the dog chases the cat into the hallway, and then suddenly they're just in the backyard.
Yep.
And I don't know what's up with that.
And it never gets
it's-
touched on again.
It's interesting because Zampano brings it up in the manuscript how there's so little written about this aspect of the documentary. And then Johnny comments on how Zampano doesn't bring it up ever again either.
Yeah.
Like, the one of the weirdest things is, like, they talk about the dog and what the dog's like and how the dog shows up in other aspects of the story and in other aspects of Navidson's life. And then the cat just fucking disappears. And that is
Mhm.
the extent of everything that ever gets talked about for the dog and the cat.
So, back to the plot. Will is like, well, I can't equip. I am so under-equipped to explore this hallway, but it needs to be explored. So he calls in 3 professionals to do it for him.
Plus his
Holloway Roberts,
his wife.
Jed Leader. Well, whatever. Who cares about Karen? Karen, at this point, does not know he went into the hallway.
Right. He lied.
Will calls in professionals, and Holloway Roberts, Jed Leader, and Wax Hook. Holloway is a professional explorer and hunter. Jed Leader is a tracker and pathfinder, and Wax Hook, he can climb anything.
These are great names.
Davidson and Holloway dislike each other immediately. It's like a manly rivalry type of thing. They like butting heads and their testosterone gets in the way. So, now we start with the explorations. Exploration 1 begins as the team pulls with them some high-grade fishing line behind them, just like, what's his name, who went into the labyrinth? Theseus. And trust me,
That comes up.
Zampano does the work for me. You know, he's the one bringing all the metaphors in.
And then, conspicuously, deleting them.
We'll talk about it. Jed Leader, it doesn't last long. They reach the end of their 2-mile-long fishing line as they enter the Great Hall, so they have to turn back. Exploration 2 begins the next day, and they discover the staircase leading down to a destination that is impossibly deep. In the middle of the Great Hall, they find this big hole with a spiral staircase spiraling down into the bottom of it. And they're like, okay, let's drop a flare down there. And it's like in the movie The Descent, where they drop the flare down and they just watch it vanish. And they wait for a while. And then they all just like look up at each other like, all right. and
They're
I don't know what to do.
They're like, we don't
So-
have enough gear for this.
they go back, they descend the stairs a little bit, and they're like, this is too fucking much. We're going back. Exploration 3. Shit is about to get good. That's what I just wrote in my notes. The team spends 45 minutes getting to the staircase and begins to descend. They do so for 7 hours, dropping a flare from where they are still fails to see it reach the bottom. They decide to return from here, and it takes them 11 hours to get back to the house. They had only traveled for 7 hours and 45 minutes, so some sort of, stretching has occurred where the distance has grown after they were inside. Johnny cuts in again. He's having a great deal of difficulty sleeping while going through this manuscript, and as he's prompted by the writings to seek out German translation, he meets Kairi. Kairi was Zampano's go-to German lady, I guess, and they hook up, but in doing so, he fails to ask for the translation. Isn't that great, Johnny? Fucking thank you, Johnny. Thank you.
Damn, dude. She cheated on Sora?
Oh my god.
Great.
Interestingly, that comes up later.
Another interjection
What?
from shut up. Another interjection from Johnny. The team is like planning Exploration 4. They're like, all right, we want to get to the bottom of these fucking stairs. We're going to do it. So, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to bring in? And it spends a good deal of time talking about what they're going to do. Johnny interjects and shines some light on his abusive foster father in the form of Raymond. Raymond was this ex-Marine who was the father of the family that had adopted him.
This is like the 5th family to have adopted him.
Yeah, and he beat the shit out of Johnny a lot. But to be fair I'm not going to be fair to an abuser, but Johnny was a little fucking demon. He was an awful kid who was constantly beating the shit out of other kids on the playground and shit, just because he wasn't okay. He's not an okay kid. Obviously no excuse for Raymond's behavior.
I believe he and his mother have described himself as having the blood of Ares, and he said during that period in school, he didn't understand the concept of fear.
Yeah. He's talking about at one point when he gets in a fight, he just stopped feeling the pain. He stopped feeling the pain of getting punched in the face, and he started getting, like, mean with it. He started, like, digging his thumbs into kids' eyes and shit.
Yeah, he permanently scarred some other children as a 7-year-old.
So, back to the plot. Holloway decides to take his rifle along with him in Exploration 4 because the growl is getting to him. He's like, there is a fucking monster out here, and I want to be able to shoot it. And Will's like, what the hell are you doing taking a gun? He's like, I'd rather have a gun if there's a monster. I agree with Holloway, by the way. I'd rather have a gun just in case there's a monster. Like, what are you talking about, Will?
Does Holloway end up shooting somebody?
Well, hold on. Also in this chapter, it's constantly, over and over again, alluding to events that occur in the future as if the reader should know what has happened already.
Right.
My next note is just SOS. This is it.
Right.
This is the third and final time that I'm going to be like, hey, if you were at all interested in what we were talking about, stop. This is it. This is the last time. This is where the book goes off the fucking rails. Okay?
Yep.
I want to leave,
I'm dead serious, Chris.
but it's my podcast.
I mean, from what I understand, it not only goes off the rails narratively, but also just structurally.
Yes.
Yeah.
It pushes the very concept of
Okay.
what a book even is.
Yep.
So, that's your chance. I'm going to continue now.
Well, then, goodbye, everybody.
You really going?
Yeah, I don't want to. I love it too much. I need to experience it.
All right. I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate your
fucking-
honesty.
Fucking bitch. Get the fuck out of here.
Okay.
So, SOS. This is like our first dip into the book, the format of the book helping to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
The paragraphs are like short, long, short, long, to mimic an SOS signal. Da-da-dot, dash, da-da-dot.
I see that.
And
I've got my book open.
Johnny gets into this, and he's like, hey, I want to do that too. So he makes his own little da-da-da dash thing, and and the Morse code for his little first interjection is fuck. He spells out the word fuck. And the impetus behind this is, in the manuscript, I think it's something about Billy Reston, how he no longer can have sex or something. But
Okay.
Johnny points out that he had crossed out sex or had sex or made love to or whatever, and then wrote in big letters fuck above it. Zampano had.
Yep.
Mhm.
So he was talking about like power of the word fuck, that kind of thing. Then later on, Johnny also interjects again and does the same thing, but this time he talks about how I don't really remember what it is. It doesn't really matter, but he's having trouble. He's sad. And he's having a conversation. It was one of Zampano's girls, and she had taken him on a drive. Was it Kyrie?
That was Kyrie, I believe.
And they didn't have sex, but she wanted to, and he was sad about it or something.
That was not Kyrie. That was some other lady.
Either way, the Morse code, that's the word I was looking for. The Morse code he spells out is buttons in that one, and I think it's alluding to the fact that something about that interaction pushed his buttons and, like, dug something up from inside of him. It doesn't really matter in the grander scheme, just know that Johnny is not doing good. Something about going through this manuscript and bringing it out is bringing something out of him that he has kept buried.
Is this Morse code explicit? Like, does Johnny Truant, like, say, hey, I'm writing out buttons?
In the sense that, he doesn't say that. No, I translated it. But in the sense that the passages are, all the different dots and dashes and whatever the fuck are separated by a dot. Like a literal
Yes.
in the book dot.
I see them.
So, SOS. In the chapter of SOS, he talks about what an SOS is and what it means. And the people in the house start hearing knocks coming through the walls. And it is very clearly ... dash 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 ... dash dash dash. It's an SOS signal. And they're like, well shit, okay, we gotta go. This is during exploration number 4.
Notably, we have learned at this stage that during exploration number 4, they had planned for about a week in there.
Right.
And they are now on day 9
Right.
with no contact.
So then the reader, we get to see what happened on Exploration 4. We jump in. At the beginning of SOS as well, there is a motherfucking check mark in the bottom right corner.
I see that as well.
The check mark, it's in the whale's toe letters. His mom says, Johnny, I want you to put a check mark in the bottom right corner of your next letter so that I know you got this secret letter that I'm sending. And he puts a check mark in the bottom right of the SOS, like in the hidden signal one. I don't know, man. There's something going on. We'll talk about it later. We see the team go into hallway for Exploration 4. Their goal is to reach the bottom of the stairs. However, we stay in the house with Will and Reston monitoring the radios as the team slowly leaves their range. Time passes with no contact. Several days pass, and then finally throughout the house, the knocking is heard. 3 short knocks, followed by 3 long knocks, repeating over and over. Seeing that this is a signal to send help, Will begins prepping for a rescue mission. He claims he waited too long for Delisle, and he won't make that mistake again. So, yet another mention of Delisle. I don't know how to pronounce that name, by the way.
I, for a longest time, thought it was Delilah, but I don't think that's right either.
And do me a favor, who was Delisle?
Delisle is just a name that Karen said that he says sometimes.
Okay.
She assumes that it's some, like, lost lover or something.
Yeah, one of the parts about Delisle is that nobody knows who specifically she is.
Yeah.
I do believe that they do know that she is a she, but past that, nobody knows anything about her. Will not explain it.
This is yet again, I think this might have been the Buttons one. Johnny interjects to talk about his time in Alaska. He was at a canning factory in Alaska, and he meets a Haitian. And during this time at the canning factory, he gets hired to be on a fishing vessel. And, like, it's so tropey. He goes into this fishing vessel, and the captain's like, no, nary a storm will capsize this vessel, arr. And then he's out there for, like, literally 4 hours, and then the vessel is capsized by a storm.
Okay.
And a Haitian that he had met on this vessel had died, and his mom says in one of the letters that Johnny says something very poetic, and I actually agree. He was really upset that the Haitian died, not because they were close friends, but it had ruined the chance that he could have been a friend with this Haitian. Like, the prospect of him, of friends, like, is the removal of hope in his eyes.
It's like they described him as on the path to being friends.
See, that's very interesting, because it seems to confirm a thought I had about Johnny previously, in that at the very beginning of the book, it feels like Johnny thinks he's a lot smarter than he actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes
And
up
in a
somewhere
lot
else as well.
In a lot of his footnotes, he speaks in this very, like, grandiose, poetic fashion.
Yeah, he waxes lyrical about a lot of shit.
Right, but it has no substance behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's one footnote that's particularly egregious to me, where he's talking about, like, birds of paradise, and
the birds in a crate and cold water. It goes back to the hot water footnote. And I'm like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yep.
But now you're saying that things are getting a little more sincere and poetic, and I feel like I had this theory that him reading Zampano's words has kind of been like leaving an impression on him.
Definitely.
I should have just trusted past Scott's notes, by the way. The person that the Buttons situation came from, he had a dinner with Thumper. Thumper and him are talking, and he tells the story to his boss, the Haitian story, and Thumper is like, huh, you want to have dinner? And while they're eating dinner, the two of them talk a lot, and he just keeps focusing on her and how beautiful she is and how she's like focusing on him. And something about her focus and her attention that she's giving to him is just really fucking with him. He is falling hard for this woman. And he completely opens up to her, tells her about Zampano and the book, everything that's going on with him, and she's just fully into it. She's talking to him and like asking questions, that kind of thing. They're having a full-blown conversation about this insane shit.
It's kind of implied here that this is his emotional reaction to her is very much, seems to me, coming from a place of, this is the first time anyone has ever given a damn about me or anything I have been going through or care about.
Yeah. And it's sad. It honestly is sad. This is like the first time where I start to feel like Johnny, I actually feel sympathy for him. My next part of the notes is just, here we fucking go.
Yep.
Chapter 9 is the first real time we get fully stricken out passages from Zampano that Johnny has rewritten in crossed out red text. For some reason, Zampano is unsatisfied with invoking the Minotaur as a way of telling the story of the Navidson report. He has all these passages about the Minotaur, and they are just fully crossed out, and he didn't like them. He was upset with them or something.
Zampano specifically didn't just cross them out, he inked over the entire section, and
Right.
Johnny had to go back with turpentine and remove the ink little by little in order to recover these pieces.
I can see this.
So the structure of chapter 9 is fucking crazy. It is structured to the reader like a labyrinth. You know what it reminded me of was in The Way of Kings, that or in the second one rather, where that king who gets smart sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Taravangian.
Where he like wrote that whole plan on like part of the walls and like under the cabinet or whatever the fuck.
This is starting to become hard for me to follow.
It's supposed to be.
So the last thing, I can understand that, but help me out a little bit here. Because I feel like we just made a hard jump
Mm-hmm.
from the SOS. I don't understand how that chapter ended, and now we're talking about a Minotaur.
The SOS is the perspective of the people waiting outside the hallway, waiting while the exploration team goes and does exploration number 4.
Right,
The goal of exploration number 4 was to get to the bottom of the stairway.
right.
They were supposed to be in there for a week, then like 10 days go by, and they start hearing the SOS signal on the walls of the house. Like,
Okay.
somebody is tapping
Yeah.
SOS on the walls.
And that's when Will said, I gotta go in.
I gotta go in. I gotta go save them.
and that's where the chapter ended?
that's where the chapter ended. Now we're jumping back in time to the beginning of exploration number 4 for chapter 9.
And this is from their perspective?
This is from exploration team's perspective.
Okay. Alright.
This chapter, Zampano is doing his best to describe to the reader the architecture of the hallway. To do this, he invokes imagery of labyrinths and postulates on the purposes by extension of the purpose of the house, like whether it was built as a prison, that kind of shit. Every page is inundated with footnotes leading up to an eventual complete breakdown of structure in the chapter as far as the reader is concerned. It starts by having footnotes that send you to prior footnotes, and then those footnotes send you to even prior footnotes, but before it can go completely off the rails, Johnny yet again interjects. It's obvious that the only solace Johnny can get from this rampant mental issue that he's going through are these random hookups with these Zampano girls. He talks about how, like, when he quote-unquote gets off with these girls, he feels a clarity that, like, sets everything right in the world. This is also the first time he says the phrase, wind, as in to wind something up.
Mm-hmm.
I put that in quotes. It's important later. Put that a little footnote in your brain. Wind is in to wind something up.
Not wind.
Not wind. After Johnny's interjection, nothing is there to stop the insanity of the chapter. Footnotes take you through whole length listing everything the hallway isn't. All the features it doesn't have, all the styles it doesn't get inspiration from, shit like that. It does this by dragging you through the chapter and the pages, moving past the actual story that Zampano had written, and then it leads you back in the other direction. You might even say that it's written like a labyrinth. Like you're following along the walls of a labyrinth, going back and forth. There are even islands in the labyrinth where if you follow a footnote, it'll take you to a different footnote, and then that footnote will take you to the previous footnote you just went to.
Right. You've got
Oh, I
footnotes.
see that.
Yes, you've got this left-hand side goes on for 6 fucking pages, just listing different art styles. The
Is it
other
upside down.
Yep.
on the right-hand side starts at the end, goes upside down for, again, like 6 to 12 pages. And it's just names of various different kinds of authors. In the fucking center, you see those blue squares? Those blue squares are a footnote listing every single thing from the first time a human being built a house to present day of a thing that will never be in this hallway.
Like, let me just, here's a brief excerpt of that footnote that he's talking about. Not only are there no hot air registers, return air vents, or radiators, cast iron or other or cooling systems, condenser, reheat coils, reheating convector, damper, concentrator, dilute solution, heat exchanger, absorber, evaporator, solution pump, evaporator, recirculating pump, or any type of ducts, whether spiral, lock, seam standing, rib design, over and over and over and over. All this horseshit that the house does not have in it. Talking about how utterly plain and nothing the entire house is.
Well, and what's even more baffling about these blue square footnotes is that on the right-hand side of the book, the front side of the page, it's written left to right, but then when you turn the page, in the exact same spot on the back of that page, it's written in reverse.
Yep.
As if the page is clear.
That was one of the few things that Scott was like, I really want to share this with you.
This is
I
the
wanna
point
show you
where
this.
is where I checked the fuck out.
Really?
This is where I checked the fuck out. I'm like, okay, the author is just fucking with us at this stage. I have almost no longer have any investment in what's going on in the footnotes or anything.
This is by far, so the structure is obviously interesting. Obviously, the structure of the chapter is incredible. I love it. I love how weird and bullshit it is. I like that it trolled me. Like, there's a footnote, I think it's 137 or 187, something like that, that I cannot find the beginning to.
Yeah, it's just not in there.
I don't know. I am confident that fucking Johnny is trolling me. And I just spent a real life 20 minutes being like, where is it? Like, flipping back and forth, trying to find where 187 or whatever the number is. And I couldn't.
Then it starts to seem like it's getting back because you start getting these weird little islands of text without the footnotes. And then there's just the fucking bibliography.
Yeah. Of all the sources of all the shit that he listed that the house isn't.
Yeah. And then it just continues on to chapter 10.
So this is by far my longest excerpt of notes here. This is just the meat of the chapter, what actually occurs, rather than the insanity of the labyrinth itself. So, through this labyrinth, we are caught up on what happened with the exploration team. As they descend upon the stairs, the teams leave stockpiles of supplies for their trip back up the stairs. It takes them 3 days to reach the bottom, which they do. They decide to spend some time taking wall samples and exploring the base of the stairs, like going around the corridors at the bottom. They travel away for 8 hours. They decide to return, only to find that it takes them 12 hours to get back to the base of the stairs. Once there, they begin to ascend and find a marker left has been eviscerated by some unknown force. Upon seeing this, Holloway cocks his rifle and is renewed by this purpose. He kind of felt like, oh, there's kind of nothing here. This sucks. You know, that was his outlook.
He's in this for, this is my chance at being something.
Right. And when he got to the bottom and realized it's just more house, he was kind of bummed. He's renewed by this purpose when he finds that, like, something in here destroyed one of their neon markers. Holloway becomes dead set on hunting whatever the fuck he believes caused this destruction, while Jed and Wax try to reason with him that they will die if they don't hurry back on their way right now. We're running out of supplies. An argument ensues, resulting in the two leaving Holloway, him stalking into the darkness by himself.
Oh, no. No.
Hold on. Who got left?
Holloway left Jed and Wax to go hunt the monster.
The big game hunter is basically come in this, like, I will find the thing in this absurd house situation that will make me famous, and then gets any scrap of evidence that there might be something else in here, and he is like, I am gonna fucking kill it. And he's off chasing something that may or may not exist, and the other two were like, we're gonna starve to death. We don't have enough supplies to get home.
Well, you also have to remember that they're like, what, about 11 days in at this point, and with the time dilation, it's probably gonna be another 2 or 3 weeks before they can get back out.
You'd think that.
You would
So
think.
Jed and Wax continue climbing, hoping that Holloway is just going to come back to his senses and just follow after them, because that's all they can do. They have to get out or they're going to die of starvation. Or dehydration, more likely.
And they also know that their markers to get back are disappearing.
Something is occurring with the markers, they keep finding them, and they're eviscerated. And also, impossibly, they ascend the stairs, and then they find a cut fishing line, implying that now Holloway, somehow this fishing line got ahead of them, and is now totally blind. He has no fishing line to follow back to get to the stairs.
Hmm.
And so they're like, he can't, there's no way for him to find his way back. We just have to leave him.
There's nothing for them to do but climb the stairs. Days pass, and they begin to realize that whatever had caused the destruction of the supplies must have been the house itself. Whenever you stop thinking about starts to deteriorate inside that place. Like,
The
they're going
zippers on their
upstairs and
the
exactly, you
zippers
go
on their
for it.
coat just start disintegrating.
Like, for some reason, their shoelaces like start to. You don't think about your shoelaces, and then suddenly they're just gone.
Or they fall apart in your hand.
They keep going. They keep getting these supply drops that they had dropped, and like the food had been like totally eviscerated by whatever force this house is causing. So a shot rings out suddenly, and Wax is struck in the side by a bullet. Holloway appears from one at the side passages along the staircase in confusion, claiming that he had just shot the beast. They apply first aid, but Wax's life is in mortal peril now. Holloway fears the repercussions of this mistake if he were to return, so once again, he stalks into the darkness alone. He thinks, if I come back, I've shot this man and they're going to put me in prison.
Great.
So now a hunter is out there, and he is probably steeled to. He is resolved to kill the two witnesses, so he could just return alone and say something happened to him.
Mm-hmm. He could have just killed them right there, I suppose.
I guess he could have.
He probably was convincing himself that he would need to do that when he walked away.
He stalks into the darkness alone, but as Jed begins to carry Wax up the stairs, another shot rings out toward Jed. He is able to flee in with Wax into one of the side passages away from Holloway, holing up in one of the many rooms the house provides. The two hide from Holloway as Jed begins knocking an SOS on the walls, presumably the source of the knocks heard by Navidson and the others. An important thing about this is, Jed was in Jed's losing his mind. He's not okay. He thinks, I'm going to die out here. He's trying desperately to knock into the wall, and they make a point to state, he is not knocking an SOS into the wall. It does not have the cadence of an SOS. And
He is panic knocking.
The knocks we hear in the house, well, Will and the others here in the house, is distinctly ... dash 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 ... dash dash dash. It's like the house took in the signal and translated it for the house team.
Oh, interesting. I would have assumed that it wasn't Jed they were hearing.
Right.
There
Or
was
that.
something else in there.
Or that. So here we go with Johnny again. Johnny's fucking here. Isn't that great, Johnny?
Yeah.
He begins to realize that the hookups are only pushing the problem into his unconscious life. He hears a story. This is actually really interesting and sad.
Are you saying he's getting tired of thumping Thumper?
He is not thumping Thumper. I think he actually loves Thumper.
I'd thump Thumper.
He interposes the Thumper onto some of the other girls in his mind's eye.
So Johnny begins to realize that the hookups are only pushing the problem that he's having into his unconscious life. He hears a story from a woman he had slept with on the radio. She had gotten radio interviewed by some shock jock, and she talked about how she hooked up with this guy, and he was weird. He had markings all over his walls, and he had this crazy manuscript, and he kept saying beautiful things about my wrists, and that's something that comes up a lot. People, even Zampano, talk about how the beautiful wrists of people, and it's real weird. So she says after he fell asleep, he began screaming of all this horrible shit. And Johnny's like, oh, fuck. I had no idea that I was doing this. I had no idea that I was screaming and having full-on panic attacks while I'm asleep. And when he realizes this while he's writing it, he has yet another full-on panic attack to the reader, freaking out I don't even know what I'm dreaming. I don't know what's wrong with me. So we return to Will, and the rescue team begins to enter the hallway. They reach the Great Hall, and Tom declares, I am not going down those stairs. Because he's too chicken shit, as I think anyone would be. He looks at the stairs and he's like, no, I'm not doing it. And based on the Halloween team's reports from before the previous expeditions, Will had estimated that the staircase was over 13 miles deep. So he's like, all right, you stay here, Tom. You're going to be like our radio anchor point that can contact Karen and the house, and hopefully you can contact us at the bottom of the stairs.
Notably, like I was saying, this is what Section 10 is starting to look like. These are how it is structured.
It gets really crazy later on. I'm going to save that talk for when later
we get to it. I've got pictures of those too, but this is where you also see stuff starting to get fucky again.
Where was
I see. Okay, so here's the deal. This is structured like steps.
I cannot believe that you're just absorbing this.
What do you mean they're structured like steps?
Stair steps. Each block of text is structured like a step on the stairs they had to go down.
Based on the tests they had done before and the reports they had gotten from the explorations previously, he had surmised that it was over 13 miles deep to get to the bottom. So he's like, well, it's going to be a long trek. He begins to descend 5 minutes later, and he's at the bottom. He looks up and he's like, hey, Tom, we're down here, Tom.
It's like 100 feet deep.
Seeing how shallow it is, Reston obviously couldn't go down. Reston went in with them because he's in a wheelchair, and he sees how shallow it is, and he's like, oh, I'll come down. And he bumps his way down. And Reston talks about how something about this place is making him feel really seasick. And it's like the immutable nature of it. Like it's constantly shifting even though I can't see. Then that's when they start to postulate maybe the growl is that. Maybe what we're hearing is the shifting and moving around of the rooms and whatever, and that's the growl. Johnny's back. Johnny visits the doctor to talk about his fears and anxiety. The doctor talks for half an hour and prescribes him some form of medication, which unsettles Johnny even more than he already has. He's really terrified of ending up like his mother, I feel. Like, he doesn't want to end up in some loony bin.
Yeah.
He decides, okay, I'm going to throw out all the alcohol, all the drugs, everything from his house before finally deciding to crush up the prescribed meds and throw them out as well. He's determined to stare his fear in the face by finding out what exactly he is screaming and dreaming about. Back to Will. They search for 2 days and nights at the bottom of the hallway, going through the passages, and they're starting up a camp. Both of them hear a noise through one of the corridors. They realize the cries are coming from the other side of the wall, so they're like, okay, we gotta find a way through this wall. We can't dig through. Maybe there's like another passage in. They find a door. No, but with no door handle. It's just a door and it's locked. They can't get through it, so they start bashing into the door. And it eventually breaks down, revealing Jed with Wax, like cradling Rex. And Jed sees Will, he's like, oh, thank God. And just as he sees him, boom, another gunshot. Jed's fucking head explodes.
Oh,
Jesus.
He's fucking Jed, man.
Obliterating Jed's face, Reston pulls out his own gun, begins firing back at the source of the shot. Will rushes over to Jed and Wax and drag them out of harm's way. Their lights are unable to penetrate the darkness, and no return fire has come. Will takes out a powerful strobe that reveals the shadowy form of a man with a rifle. He takes aim, but as he does, we see a series of doors behind him. So we see like a shadowy form in the distance, and we see a series of doors behind the man, like it's several corridors and several doors and several doorways in front of, like interposing the man and behind the man.
Yeah. He's using his most powerful camera flash to repeatedly light up this hallway as doors slam shut behind him.
And we see the man take aim, and we hear thud, 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 and the doors just like interpose and suddenly all slam and save Will from getting shot. And just as the first one, the one right in front of Will closes, the shot rings out and impacts into the door and almost blows a hole into it, and they run away.
I'm looking at the pages right now, talking about it, and the words are all over the fucking place on the pages.
Yep.
There's rarely more than 5 words on a page. They're usually in the center, near the bottom. They're talking. Let me take a picture of this real quick so you guys can see it.
Can you give me a visual on that?
Yeah, these pages right here are as, and there's notably more space between the words here, as the doors are slamming shut in front of them. this is what the words look like.
That's something I really want to hammer home. There are parts of this book that are just an incredible slog. Like, getting through them is insanity. It takes so long, you're like, oh, fuck it, yeah, okay, I get it, yes, echoes. But then there are other parts where you're just zipping through pages over and over and over, because there's like 5 words on each page.
Mm-hmm.
And it's action scenes, too.
So, what follows after that is a transcript of Tom's time at the top of the stairs, waiting for Will and Reston to return. And there's a lot of fun jokes that I kind of want to tell John, but I don't think I care enough. There's a lot of fun jokes that Tom tells himself, and they're just him having fun with himself.
Give me the best one right now, just one.
Ooh, I don't know about the best one. I don't remember what the best one might be.
But what we're seeing on it is Tom also has claustrophobia very badly. Not as bad as Karen's, but he does not have a good time being in here. He is in a space that he cannot perceive, basically surrounded by darkness on all sides, with no real way to tell time, no real way to tell direction, or contact his brother, who is his lifeline in here. And he is doing the only things he can to stay sane.
And that's by talking to the monster, the quote-unquote monster that's surrounding him, and referring to how I'm in the monster's house, and it's you can't get me, Mr. Monster, that kind of thing. And he also tells jokes to himself.
He makes shadow puppets on the inside of the tent.
And here's a joke. Here's a joke.
That's so dangerous for, like, a horror movie aspect. If you start making shadow puppets, my guy.
Here we go. The 7 dwarves went to the Vatican, and when the Pope answered the door, Dopey stepped forward. Your Excellency, he said. I wonder if you could tell me if there are any dwarf nuns in Rome. No, Dopey, there aren't, the Pope replied. Behind Dopey, the 6 dwarfs started to titter. Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Italy? Dopey persisted. No, none in Italy, the Pope answered a little more sternly. A few of the dwarves now began to laugh more openly. Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Europe? This time the Pope was much more firm. Dopey, there are no dwarf nuns in Europe. By this point, all the dwarves were laughing aloud and rolling around on the ground. Pope, Dopey demanded, are there any dwarf nuns in the whole world? No, Dopey, the Pope snapped. There are no dwarf nuns anywhere in the world. Whereupon the 6 dwarves started jumping up and down, chanting, Dopey fucked a penguin! So dumb. Johnny interjects. Johnny interrupts this trying time that Tom is having to tell a full-on breakdown that he had at work. Thumper was there, and she sent him away telling him to get some rest. I get the impression that a lot of the people in his life are assuming he's strung out on drugs, but Thumper, I hope, gets the situation. He told everything to her. I think she just gets intuitively that he has fucked himself up with this book. Or it's just like set the ball rolling on something that was already there to begin with. She tells him to get some rest. He takes the chance to elaborate on his mention of the Pekingese from before. Now, I'm going to treat this one with a bit of reference here. He had mentioned a Pekingese before, and I didn't mention it because I knew I was going to talk about it here. When he told this story, I don't really know how to say it. It just got to me. Something got to me. And I don't know if it's like a combination of... I teased with the idea of having a nightmare about this story. It wasn't a full-blown nightmare, like I woke up in a cold sweat type of thing, but I had trouble.
Yeah, this story hit me bad too.
So, I'm just gonna read the whole thing as I've written it. Last December, Johnny had met a woman who he had briefly attempted to court at a club, but only at Lude's prodding. He was kind of not into it. For lack of a better term, she was a plastic woman, in the sense that she was enhanced. Like, she had huge fake breasts, and like crazy lips, and crazy long fingernails, or nails with the fake acrylics and whatever.
Johnny goes quite a ways to spell out, in a number of ways, how this woman was not right.
Yeah. They talked, but according to Johnny, it wasn't a flowing conversation. The woman just never... Huh?
Not right, or like not natural?
Something is just wrong with her.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But at Lude's prodding, he's like, all right, I'll go and chat this woman up. They talked, but according to Johnny, it wasn't a flowing conversation. The woman just never excused herself from his company. Like, he would say things like, hey, nice weather we're having, and she's like, yeah. and then there'd just be lulls in the conversation where no one said anything, and then he would speak up again, and she'd be like, uh-huh, but she just never left. When the time came to leave, she said goodbye to her friends, and then her and Johnny, she, like, invited him into her car, and she gave 3 different answers for what her name was, so Johnny settles on Johnny, but with an IE. Very confusing. So Johnny and Johnny are driving their truck. They see a small Pekingese on the side of the road, very pitiful looking. There's like snot coming out of its nose and shit. Johnny decides immediately, I'm keeping this dog. He grabs the dog and he's like, it's coming with me. I'm going to save it. I'm a
So
stray.
Johnny with a
I found
Y.
the stray. Huh?
Johnny with a Y. Our Johnny.
Our Johnny. I don't know why I didn't think to say that. Our Johnny. I'll call her not Johnny. How about that?
Okay.
Johnny says, I'm keeping this dog. I want it. He's going to bring it to his apartment and keep it for her. But not Johnny is like, no. Can you believe that dog living in your shitty apartment? I have like a house, a dog, a place a dog wants to stay. I'm going to take care of him and feed him, and he's going to be well treated. And he's like, okay. Johnny's like, all right. And he relents, allowing himself to get dropped off without inviting her to his place. Johnny says there is something very wrong with this woman. He can just sense something inhuman about her. And sure enough, as she drives away, Johnny begins to turn towards his apartment and hears a thump. And he talks about this thump and how sickening it was, and he doesn't know if it's sickening now or if it was sickening then. And he runs down the street and he starts like getting faster and faster, and he runs to the source of the thump, and he finds that the Pekingese was thrown out of the truck. Its little head has been crushed and bashed in after hitting the pavement. So this evil woman,
Wow.
for some reason, insisted that she keep the dog only to throw it out of the truck. And something about the image of this fake woman, I don't know. It just really fucking got me.
Mm-hmm.
It got to me because of the dog, specifically.
Yeah.
A little vulnerability here, not solely related to this. I had, when I was living in the apartment, when we had Coco was doing very, very poorly. She was very old. I think she had cancer. It was bad. And I'm going to cut it short by saying Coco died in my arms while I was trying to get her to the vet.
Dude, here's the thing, man.
We don't have time to talk about it, but
no, you know what? You
that-
uncorked it. So, I also have a sad dog dying in my arms story.
Okay.
We had to put Dolly down. Dolly was our beloved family pet. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have this exact story, and we did the thing, like she was really sick, and we went to the vet, put her down, and the vet's like, most people tend to leave the room when we're about to do this, so now's the time to say your goodbyes. And I'm like, okay. And when we all said our goodbyes, I pet her, I give her little scritches that she likes. And as we were leaving, I was the last one, and before the door was closing, she started like whimpering really bad, and I'm like, I can't fucking do this. I cannot leave. And so I he let me just sit in the room and hold her as she passed out.
Yeah, I didn't get that's.
No.
It's very uncomfortable. Cody, I know you're familiar with that.
Yeah, with Bubba and Sparky, I was in the room and it strikes you with how quick it happens.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry to bum everybody out with our sad dog stories.
Yeah, mine was traumatic, and having to listen to this person having just senselessly killed a puppy for no reason.
And it immediately made me think of the Haitian.
Right.
He lost a chance to have a friend that he could have had.
I have a note here that I didn't get to read at the time when it came up, but it kind of made me frustrated with Johnny because I can't remember the exact context of why he says this, but I think it's the reason why he chose to take Zampano's manuscript in the first place. And he says he likes abandoned stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my note here, I say, I think it reminds him of himself.
Yeah.
We
And then
are
what
going to talk about this.
Well, hang on. What made me frustrated with Johnny is I'm like, he says he likes abandoned stuff. I bet probably because it reminds him of himself. And then the next sentence, Johnny says, it's probably because it reminds me of myself. He
I
just
wonder
says
if
it explicitly.
If it is, in fact, Johnny that likes abandoned stuff. Moving on, we return to Tom in the hallway, muttering to himself and losing his composure. He's like slowly getting worn down by the Minster Monster, and we learn through his conversations with Karen that all of her feng shui objects have just vanished. as if consumed by the house. Like, at one point, Chad and Daisy are like, Mom, what happened to all your cool turtles and whatever? And she's like, what are you talking about, kids? She's like, all your cool turtles and little statues are gone. And she goes through the house and all the feng shui shit has just vanished. The house has eaten it.
So now things are happening in the real world,
Yep.
not in the hallways.
Correct.
The events with Holloway take place over the radio and with the gunshots and the slamming doors with Tom. And Will tells Tom they will be there in 8 hours and to be ready to help them at the bottom of the stairs. And of course, Tom's like, oh shit, I gotta get to the bottom of the stairs. I don't know if I can do this. He's unable to conquer this fear and returns to the house. So Will and Reston arrive with Wax at the bottom of the stairs to see that Tom isn't there, and Will is immediately like, shit. He's such a flake, he always does this, he always lets you down, and then a rope descends from above. Tom had gotten a pulley system to set up to hoist them. Wax is pulled up easily, but while they send Reston up, this was so cool. This was so fucking awesome. While they send Reston up, they're like pulling him up, leaving Will at the bottom. They notice that the slack in the rope begins to disappear. It's like getting taut. And they're like, what's happening? What's going on? And suddenly the rope just zips out of Will's hands, and the staircase just, like, extended. And he is an impossible distance down. He is suddenly just so far down that you couldn't even fathom it. And they are gone. To help you fathom it, at the bottom, Will waits with the flare for an hour, and after the hour has passed, he hears a clatter behind him. It's a quarter. This tells him that assuming Tom dropped that minutes after the staircase stretch, that he must be an impossible distance down. Zampano, does a quick thing that Johnny then says this is wrong, but he then doesn't put his own equation.
Another editor jumps back in and is like, this is also wrong.
Yeah. So I didn't bother to say an actual number, because it's crazy down.
The numbers that they suggest is greater than the entire diameter of the Earth.
Exactly. He is deeper than the entire diameter of the Earth. So says Zampano. And again, the format of the book is going absolutely nuts when it's stretching, like the words are literally stretching down the page. It's really cool. We return to see Karen's POV of the situation as Tom and Reston come barreling in with an awful roar following along with... But before we get to this, I skipped over this part because it doesn't matter. We see this scene from the perspective of a teacher that Chad and Daisy had, who just visit the house because she's worried about the kids. And the teacher walks in and all hell is breaking loose. There's blood everywhere and they're like, oh fuck, we gotta get him to a hospital. And she's like, okay. And she just closes the door. Karen's POV of the situation as Tom and Reston come barreling in with an awful roar following along them. Like a roar from the hallway is following along with them. And Reston quickly shutting and locking all the door to the hallway, seeing all the carnage, and no Will. Karen is inconsolable. She's like, he's dead. It's all fucked. I knew he shouldn't have went in there. Paramedics are called. Wax eventually makes a full recovery. After hearing about Will's fate, Karen insists that the sheriff go into the hallway to find Will. Days have passed at this point. We're just moving really forward ahead.
And also, Will isn't alone in there.
Jed's
Holloway's still in there.
Not Jed, Holloway, yeah. So the sheriff shows up, and she's like, go find him, go save my Will, and hands him a flashlight. He opens the door, walks 5 feet in, and sees that the hallway has no end, and he's just like, be seeing you? And he just leaves.
It comes up in his discussions about it later when he finally does talk about it, because they had said Holloway is in there and he has shot 2 people.
Yep.
And it's like, you have to stop him. And he walks in there, he gets 5 feet in, and in his own mind he goes, if Holloway is real, and if he's in here, I don't have to worry about him. Mm-hmm. He's gone.
So, Tom is off the wagon hardcore in the following days and weeks
oh yeah, because he was sober.
He was sober, and he is just getting super drunk. And there's a moment where it's written as, he might have spent all night drinking had exhaustion not caught up with me, but this is not attributed as a quote. It literally says, he might have spent all night drinking had exhaustion not caught up with me.
I caught that.
And it doesn't feel, I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know if it's a typo that the editors missed, which is to say, the real-life editors of the book in our universe, or...
I don't believe that for a
second.
Know. Me is there for a reason.
I've noticed typos in this book, in the Zampano manuscript.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that comes up.
And I don't know if they're
intentional or not. Everything feels like it's supposed to be intentional.
I have every confidence that they are 100% supposed to be there.
I have... Hold on a second.
So-
Past Scott is confusing me. You talk, John.
So at this point, we are almost 2 hours into the podcast. How far into the story are we?
Don't worry. We're not getting to hour 3.
Because I'm looking at the pictures that Kyle's posted, and I'm seeing page 289. And isn't the book 700 pages long or something?
No.
Some
The
crazy
most
shit?
the meat at the end. The book is 529 pages long. The meat at the end is
Okay.
the index and the appendices and all that shit.
Yeah,
Okay.
shit that explains so much.
And of those 500 and some odd pages, a lot of them are just almost completely blank.
Right.
I'm
way
seeing that, yeah.
way more of that. The actual book is significantly shorter in actual, if you were to write out everything and not in that, it would be significantly shorter.
Also, why does this book have an index?
I don't know. And here's another thing. In the index, we didn't even mention this. What the fuck is wrong with us? Every instance of the word house in this book is in blue text.
Every
Why?
single, even in different languages. Like when
Even
he's writing
when
in
house
German,
is a part of another word.
right?
Blue House is real.
Blue house
Why?
is real. Here's the crazy thing, though. In the index, for some reason, there's an index for house normal text does not exist. House blue text, this is how many times it appears.
It says DNE does not exist.
Yeah.
Why did they put it in there?
I don't know.
There are other words in this index. Ballerina does not exist. It doesn't exist there's the word ballerina is not in this book. Why is it in this index?
I don't know. I'm scared.
Why is this index here?
So Tom and Rustin attempt to find Will the next day, but after entering the hallway, it ends after only 30 feet. It's just a 30-foot dead end, and they're like, there's nothing to do. There's no doors or passageways. They just leave. There's nothing to be done. Will is lost. Chad claims to have heard, Chad the son, we haven't mentioned him a lot, he claims to have heard the voice of someone muttering and a gunshot. He says that while he was in his room, he heard you couldn't really understand what they were saying, but someone talking and then a loud pop. And he tells them, and they're like, I don't know what to talk about. Then it just says, read the joke on 321. So here's the joke on 321. This is for you, John. Tom tries to shrug off the certitude that his brother is dead. You know, he continues very quietly, still staring at the hallway. There once was this guy who went to Madrid. He was in the mood for something new, so he decided to try out a small restaurant and order, sight unseen, the house specialty. Soon a plate arrived loaded with rice pilaf and 2 large meaty objects. What's this? He asked the waiter. Cojones, senor. What are cojones? Cojones, the waiter answered, are the testicles of the bull that lost in the arena today. Though a little hesitant at first, the man still went ahead and tried them. Sure enough, they were delicious. Well, a week later, he goes back to the same restaurant and orders the same thing. This time, when the dish arrives, his meaty objects are much smaller and doesn't taste nearly as good. He immediately calls the waiter over. Hey, he said, what are these? Cojones, the waiter replies. No, he explains. I had them last week, and they were much bigger. Ah, senor, the waiter replies. The bull does not lose every time.
Yep.
So while he's
that's
sure his
good.
brother is dead, and he just uses humor to break up the tension.
Yeah.
During the 4th night of Will's absence, he suddenly walks out of the hallway into the house. Just suddenly, out of nowhere, it's as random and sudden as it is just right now. We see in the Navidson record, the film. Also, they have these cameras up. We talked about it before. And I kept thinking about Paranormal Activity. And surely this isn't the first instance of this. But is this the first instance of, using that kind of found footage? In a
The
book?
only other thing that would predate this would be the Blair Witch Project.
And I was going
Right.
to say that at the beginning, but I forgot. I definitely got the impression that Mark, the author, our real-life author, saw the Blair Witch Project and was like, ooh, I could fuck some shit up with this.
It would be a real quick turnaround, though, because Blair Witch Project was 99 and this was 2000.
Yeah.
He was
There was no way he could write
Yeah,
this.
he
in-
was definitely in the process of writing this well before the Blair Witch Projects.
Either way, they keep also alluding to something called The Last Interview, where they interview everyone who is involved in the story after all the events have taken place. But the actual transcript of the last interview, specifically, is missing in the exhibits. After the book is done, there are exhibits 1 through 6, and I think Exhibit 1 is supposed to be the last interview, and it just says, show the transcript of the, as a to-do
It says
list.
reproduce the transcript of the Reston interview and the last interview, and it's just like
and it's just,
missing.
it's not there. Missing.
We don't even know who was interviewed in the last interview?
We do. I mean, I guess there could be some people in absentia who weren't referenced in the, but
Process of elimination?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do you think it is?
we know that Will was, we know that Karen was, we know that Reston gets interviewed, but not necessarily in the last interview, and Chad and Daisy might have been, I don't know. Tom might have been, I don't know.
Tom specifically did not.
We'll get there. So Will says in the last interview that before he found the Holloway tapes, he kept fixating on the possibility that Holloway would jump out from a corner and kill him. He kept thinking, at any time I turn, Holloway's gonna be there and he's just gonna blast my head off. That is when he stumbled on the supplies. He had stumbled on Holloway's tapes, all of Holloway's shit, just in a pile in front of him. And he's like, well, okay, I guess these are mine now. But no body in sight. He began focusing on his family, and seemingly the house brought him back to them. Like, there's some sort of quantum phenomena occurring with the house where, like with the neon markers in the supplies from before, if you stop thinking about it, they stop existing.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, they go into this when they're discussing the trying to find stuff, and when they are trying to get in for the rescue mission to the stairs, wherein they continuously talk about seemingly what the house, like the hallways and stuff, configured themselves based on what you expect of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were going in, the initial crew going in was like, we have no way of knowing how deep these stairs go. They reached the end, and when the rescue team goes in, the stairway is like 100 feet deep.
Yeah.
Because
It takes
they're
about 5
that.
minutes.
yeah, but they go into a great deal of that they knew there was an end, so they
Yep.
got to it quickly.
Exactly.
Ah, I see. Okay. It's kind of like Interstellar.
It is.
And how
That's
love
exactly
is
where
the
my brain
only
went.
phenomenon that transcends time and space. Will wanted to be close to his family, and so he got close to his family.
So Johnny explains the next section is the Holloway tape. We go through the Holloway tape and what happens on the Holloway tapes. And throughout the Holloway tapes, Johnny explains that throughout them, there are what seem to be burns of some kind of ashy substance that obfuscates parts of the passage, making them totally illegible. He continues on about his situation, stating that Lude came to see him. It was the first time they had spoken in months, and Lude was angry with Johnny that he had lost his job. He had lost his job at the tattoo shop because he just stopped showing up. He came to see him to try and get him off of what he thought was bad drugs. Of course, he saw the reality that Johnny was sober as a dog, and the book was the thing destroying him. And Lude was like, Johnny, you gotta throw it away. You gotta throw away this book. It's fucking you up. So Lude went away, but not before leaving his lighter with Johnny and warning him that Kyrie's boyfriend was in town. Gdansk man was in town looking for both of them. Kyrie, of course, was the German lady who they had hooked up. I don't know if she's German, but she speaks German. Who they had hooked up with. Both of them had hooked up with. Or, well, I don't know if Lude did.
Lude did not, but
Lude
he
introduced Kyrie to Johnny. But Gdansk man is her boyfriend. That's what Johnny refers to him as, because he's from Gdansk. In Norway?
I believe Holland.
Whatever. This is also the first outright time that Johnny kind of flirts with the idea of a fourth wall, wondering aloud to the reader if this has all been made up. Not by Zampano or himself. He reveals that he has purchased a gun for the inevitable moment where he senses there will be no escape. There was also the second time that a blank footnote has appeared in one of Johnny's interjections. Like,
I noticed that.
and I don't know what the fuck's up with it.
It's just blank. It's not missing. It's there. But it's just...
He didn't write anything.
What follows are transcriptions of visits that Holloway had with a psychiatrist long before meeting Davidson. These are used to give some context to the actions he had taken and will take in the Holloway tapes, but ultimately they are also pointless, much like the Echo. They kind of give a... they're pointless. We see Holloway eventually driven to suicide because he finds no escape. This is likely what Chad heard earlier, when he heard the muttering to himself and the gunshot. Holloway takes his rifle, points it at his chest, and blows himself away.
Notably, he does not die immediately. It takes about 2.5 minutes for him to actually die from the gunshot wound.
And he had set up the camera to watch him commit suicide, and in the film, it just sits on his body for a long time. As Holloway's body sits there, we see tendrils of black cover him and erase his form as the flare he lit dies out.
Notably, the sound is incredibly prominent on the film
It's like
during that moment.
the roar is in the room with them.
Right.
Like what?
The roar.
The growl is in the room with them.
Incredibly loud and incredibly present right there.
So Davidson and Karen are watching this, and they're just like, Karen's like, all right, we gotta go. She starts packing. They all prepare to leave the house. Davidson's packing all the film to take with him. As they are preparing, Reston is outside with the now fully locked hallway and begins to hear a roaring that comes closer and closer and closer to the locked door until eventually it suddenly stops, and a powerful knocking begins shaking the entire frame. All hell breaks loose throughout the house as walls shift and the floor begins to change on a whim. Everyone is able to get out except for Tom. He was busy saving Daisy. And he ushers Daisy down to the kitchen and takes her through a window. But just as he's about to escape through the window, the floor begins moving like it's the thing that you run on. What do you call that?
Treadmill?
A treadmill. Begins pulling him back and he can't get out. And Will watched. He's at the window and the window's shifting and crazy, but just as Will approaches the window, it calms and stops so he can climb through. It's like it's obeying him. And he goes to get to Tom, and he's in the kitchen, and they can't get to each other. He's sitting in the windowsill, and Tom, whenever he tries to get closer, the floor just pulls him back. And Tom, suddenly, it fucked me up when it talked about this. Suddenly, the walls, just like a snap of a frame, close on Tom's hands when they're outstretched, and to shatter all the bones in his fingers.
Fuck.
Yeah, and it's like they said it was like the shutter of a camera. The cameras that were in the room couldn't see it. It was just bam.
And there's a moment where Will is like, come to me, Tom, I got you, I can save you, and then the floor is just gone. And Tom just vanishes. Tom is just swallowed whole by the house. And there's this part, I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was weird. Chad is outside the house, and he says, and so did Reston, hear this horrible gasp, and they then assume that later this was Tom's last gasp, as it for whatever reason reverberates through the house and through the neighborhood.
Every time there's a significant sound in the house, it can be heard through the entire rest of the house, and it's implied that this was the sound of Tom hitting the bottom.
Right. So, the family leaves the house, and Will goes to his brother's home to arrange things for his funeral, presumably, but yet does not meet up with his family in New York. Chad, Daisy, and Karen stay up in New York, and Will stays in Virginia with Reston to make sense of the footage. Johnny interjects to break up the tension. Johnny speaks of a keepsake from his mother. This was also mentioned at the very end of the Whalestow letters. When his mother passed away, spoiler alert, people die, I don't know if you knew that. His mother passed away, and he had taken a locket that he had kept. It was in the shape of a deer. Inside the locket was a letter that he had written to her when he was a boy. In fact, it's the first letter that he had ever written to her while she was in the Whalestow Institute. And it's the only one she kept while at the asylum. This letter was as simple as she had sent him a care package of a dictionary and some just fun little learning books, and he had just sent a thank you note. And she had kept it forever, and she went nuts about this in the Whalestow letter. She was over the fucking moon and talking about how she was like a little schoolgirl dancing around so happy because her son, who she idolized and loved so much, had finally made contact with her. And it's so sad. So 4 months go by, and Will doesn't return to Karen and the kids. Then suddenly, Karen, receives all of this footage from the house in a box with no Will. Will is still gone, and she takes it upon herself to piece some of it together. She is, in fact, the source of I didn't mention this before. Hold on. Talk amongst your hills.
Okay. So, this is, the big parts of this are then going into sections wherein we are learning, partly what Will and Reston were doing, which was analyzing samples that had been taken and trying to make sense of the house, while Karen, having received all this, we discuss what happens to Will and Reston much later, but after discussing that the house essentially would have existed from the last sample they took radiocarbon dating would have put it at well before the formation of the solar system.
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. I was just looking for the release history. I couldn't talk about this. So
Right.
the Navidson record it was a film in Zampano's universe inside of his head, I guess. But what actually occurred, like the order of release was, in 1990, a short called The 5.5 Minute Hallway, which is what I had mentioned before, where Navidson films the hallway and then goes around the house to show that this hallway should not exist. That was released in 1990. In 1991, Exploration Number 4, which was a short that was released, I didn't really mention on that because I knew we were going to get to it later. It just showed excerpts from Exploration Number 4, and I think it showed like bits of Jed and Wax getting hunted.
It shows a bit, I think it shows a bit of the Holloway tape at the end when he's
Right.
basically completely isolated.
And then in 1993 was the proper release of the Navidson record.
Mm-hmm.
So it is presumed that when Karen receives this footage, she was the source of, if not both, the 5.5 Minute Hallway and Exploration Number 4. At the very least, she definitely created the 5.5 Minute Hallway.
Right.
And distributed that to a bunch of famous people. Like, real-life famous people who exist in this world, who she then asked, like, hey, what do you think about this footage? It's crazy. So Johnny tried to contact any of the people quoted and has yet to hear back from most of them except for two, and both of the ones he hear back from deny knowledge of any of this.
So now we're at one of those hard stop things where the Navidson record probably doesn't exist and never did.
Johnny gets a call from Thumper out of the blue. He had sent her a page a long time ago, and she never called him back from the page. And out of the blue, she calls, and throughout their brief conversation, he begins to realize just how little he knows her as a person. He's like fallen so hard for her, but he doesn't even know her real name. He doesn't know, like, she has a daughter or a son. I don't remember which one it is. That's how little Johnny knows her. And he also realizes the thought of her doesn't sway him much anymore. But he resolves himself in that moment to learn her real name and more about her in an attempt to cling on to that connection. But just before he can ask, it's like the phone company is like, oh wait, this guy didn't pay, and shuts the phone off.
Yeah, he has been locked in his apartment now for 6 months.
Yeah.
He eats nothing but one can of tuna and a cup of rice and a glass of water a day. That's what he's living on.
So after interviewing all these people that Karen went to regarding the house, Karen decides to edit together a film she calls A Brief History of Who I Love. In this film, we see exactly that, the history of Will Navidson and the pictures he took during his life. It ends on the picture that won him the Pulitzer Prize, as it slowly zooms in to see written on the photo the name Delisle. So this photo is definitely a reference to a real-life photo. In the book, the photo is of a small Sudanese girl, and she is being stalked by a vulture, and she's like picking up a bone to presumably eat the marrow.
Because
out
she
of
is
the bone.
starving to death.
Yeah.
I've seen that photo.
That's
yes.
a real life photo, and in real life, they make a mention of this. The editors point out that this photo is inspired by the real life photo taken by Kevin Carter that won him the Pulitzer Prize in 1994. People criticized his role in taking the photo, and he ended up taking his own life.
Yep.
So, Navidson is almost certainly inspired by Kevin Carter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the character is inspired by the real life Kevin Carter.
Well, this is it the character in
Oh, sorry, I should say this photo is inspired by the real life photo that Kevin Carter took, and Navidson, I guess, fixated on Delisle. He had named this child in his head Delisle.
Okay.
And that is this mythical Delisle that he kept mentioning. He couldn't save Delisle. He took the few seconds to take her picture rather than grab up the little girl and give her some food or take her somewhere where she could survive. And he hated himself for it.
Well, okay, so I guess the question then is Will Navidson inspired by Kevin Carter in Mark Danielewski's story or in Zampano's story?
Maybe both.
Maybe both.
Because now it seems like Will Navidson is not a real person even.
I feel like I skipped an important note. There was a note that I'd left that I had written a while ago. John, are you there, by the way?
I'm here.
Just making sure, I'm sorry. At one point, I think it's when... I don't remember exactly when it was, but Zampano just lists a shitload of photographers.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny talks to the person who made the list for Zampano, and she said Zampano would just, like, be sitting there while she described a photo, and he'd be like, yeah, that one. No, not that one. Yeah, that one's good.
Yeah. That list is like hundreds of names long.
Yeah.
It comes out to like, what, 4 total pages of just names of maybe photographers?
And I presume that all of them are real, but I don't care enough to look. So, here we are. Where are we? Let's read these 11 facts that Zampano has written about what we know of the house.
Wait, is that the end of the narrative?
No.
God, no.
Okay.
Number 1, the house has no light. Number 2, house has no humidity. Number 3, no air movement, i.e. breezes, drafts, etc. Number 4, temperature remains at 32 degrees Fahrenheit plus or minus 8 degrees. No sounds. Number 5, 5.1, except for a dull roar which arises intermittently, sometimes seemingly far off, sometimes sounding close at hand. Number 6, compasses do not function there. 6.1, nor do altimeters. 6.2, radios have a limited range. 7, walls are uniformly black with a slightly ashen hue. 8, there are no windows, moldings, or other decorative elements. 9, size and depth vary enormously. 1, the entire place can instantly and without apparent difficulty change its geometry. 2, some have just suggested the dull roar or growl is caused by these metamorphoses. 3, no end has been found there. 10, the place will purge itself of all things, including any item left behind. 1, no object has ever been found there. 2, there is no dust. And 11, at least 3 people have died inside. 1, Jed Leader, Holloway Roberts, and Tom Davidson. 2, only 1 body was recovered.
Jeds?
Yeah, Jet. And that was when Wax and Tom got out. They brought and Reston got out.
Yeah.
So Davidson has the wall samples, and he's like, all right, let's carbon date these bitches. And the 17 pages containing the information that have, from this carbon dating, have apparently vanished from the manuscript that Johnny provided according to the editors. The way they word it is really sus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Johnny goes on to explain that he accidentally allowed ink to seep through the pages and ruin their texts, but the way the editors word it is that they just kind of lost them or they vanished.
I see.
So I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah, it's like they received them, and they describe it as like they got them, and then they're just not there. And then Johnny goes on to explain, oh, hey, by the way, this is what happened to them.
Yeah, I had a cracked bottle of ink on top of them and didn't realize it was cracked, and then over the course of the months that it took me to get to this section, I realized, oh fuck, they've all been sodden.
But he doesn't say he gave them to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he's making an excuse for why they're not in the finished product, even though he wouldn't have known that the publishers lost them.
Yeah.
So why is he making an excuse for why they're not there?
So he also ordered even more guns and has taken to spending great deals of time aiming them at the walls or shadows because it's the only thing that can bring him solace. One of the guns he orders is the exact same rifle that Holloway used in the Davidson record.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same or like the same type and model?
The same model.
Okay.
It picks back up with Davidson discovering from the carbon dating that the range of samples are from a very broad spectrum of history, the oldest coming from the wall sample taken from the very bottom of the staircase when it had stretched Will all the way down. It was dated to be older than the Earth, even more than that, dated to be older than the creation of the solar system. And that was just as old as they could have told.
Mm-hmm.
After getting the results, Reston and Will have a conversation, a really deep conversation. Reston wants to call in professionals to explore the house. Will agrees, and they're just like, toast to him returning to his family. Through the night, they get very drunk, and when Reston awakes, Will is gone, leaving a letter written to Karen. Reston returns to the house and sees Will's car in the driveway. Finding the courage to enter, he finds the house empty and no hallway. It is just a normal house. And this chapter spends a great deal of time postulating different theories on why Will returned to the house. It's like yet another Echo situation. There's different named theories from different people that definitely don't fucking exist about why, putting forward their own theories about why exactly Will returned to the house.
Notably don't exist in the narrative that is going on with Johnny either.
Right. And
Say that one more time?
The stuff that they're talking about, Johnny has looked up, they don't exist.
all of these people that Zampano has said, this person put forward the Haven Slocum theory of why Will went back.
Yeah.
And none of these people are real. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. It's just like a way to make it feel more like a literary critique. And it's so interesting. Citing people who don't exist in the theories from people who don't exist. And we see the letter he wrote to Karen as well, and how distraught he was over Delisle. It's really actually it was pretty tough to read. Davidson tells of all these dreams And these dreams are used to further postulate on his reason for returning. He like dreams about like a snail. None of it fucking matters, but it's just in there to make it look more real? I don't know. Thank God. At this point, this is where I am with the book. Thank fucking Christ, Johnny cuts in to say he remembered a dream when he was mentioning having it before. This was a good one, I felt. I loved reading through this. In the dream, he is wandering through the halls of a wrecked vessel of some kind, perhaps the wreck that Tex talked of. I can't believe I didn't mention that before. So, there had been this person named Ashley, who came up to Johnny. He's like, Johnny, I know you. We met in Texas. Yeah, and Johnny's like, I don't know you, but yeah, sure, let's hook up. And they smooch and bang, kinda, but not really. I think they don't really bang, but they kinda like get it on. And then just as Johnny's leaving, Ashley is like, hey, well, I had a great time. I just wanted to see. It's yet another one of these themes of the chance to have a friend that I could have had but was ripped away, I feel. I keep seeing that theme pop up where Ashley's like, I just wanted a chance before I get really married, because she's about to get married and she cheated on her fucking fiance with Johnny, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to know if there was actually something here with Johnny, because she really fell hard for him. Johnny doesn't even remember who this lady is. And just as he's about to leave, he's like, I've never been to Texas. And he walks away. Then we learn that through this story, she must have been talking about Tex. She was saying Texas, a house, Texas house. And he was just this weird Norwegian man who would tell stories. He was really esoteric and flamboyant, I guess. And he would just tell these stories about, like, usually ships getting wrecked and people inside them dying. So he has a dream. He's wandering through the halls of a wrecked vessel of some kind, perhaps this wreck that Tex talked of. While wandering, he senses that the presence of another, and this excites him and also terrifies him. Almost immediately, he stumbles into them, and it's a frat boy with an axe. The frat boy stalks toward him to cleave with the axe, and Johnny imagines all the horrible things that the frat boy will do to him. Then he interrupts himself to tell us that he met Kyrie in the supermarket again. She is getting married to Gdansk Man, but propositions Johnny for another drive. He refuses, and she angrily throws a can toward him. Continuing with the dream, the frat boy moves to strike, but as he does, Johnny realizes he is much stronger and more vicious than this attacker. Describing his form, he sees that he is a twisted monster with disfigured claws and limbs. Before he can strike out at the frat boy, the man turns into Kyrie, but then Ashley, and then finally Thumper. But not really, apparently. The not really Thumper then cleaves into Johnny, and he dies, ? Then the dream ends. So that's great.
Interesting.
The theories
Okay.
end by postulating that the house not only affects the people who directly interact with it, but also those who study and write about it in varying levels of severity.
I was right.
Were you? What right about what?
I was right about Johnny reading Zampano's works are directly interfering with him.
Oh,
The things that Zampano's writing about are manifesting in Johnny's world.
I just kind of
in
like
life.
keep saying stuff like, oh, Johnny's not doing great. To further elucidate on that, he is keeping tape measures around his house or his apartment to make sure the walls aren't moving. That kind of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got tape measures nailed to his fucking walls and to the floor. He specifically only works with the book in a little square that he has measured out to make sure that nothing moves while he is reading the book.
Yeah. So Karen returns to the house in search for Will, but before she goes, she speaks to the real estate agent. The agent tells her of her own research into the history of the house, nothing ghosty or mystical from what she could see. However, she learned that the house was connected in some way to the Jamestown colony. Zampano tries to elucidate on this, but Johnny interjects, and even more aggravatingly than normal, he's using F instead of S, because Zampano had just shown us an old-timey letter that used the soft S for instead of F or whatever the fuck. And Johnny then keeps doing that for him in his own interjection.
I see.
And so it makes it just really annoying to read.
Yeah, just replace almost every instance of the letter S with the letter F. And there's a lot of it in there, so that it's really annoying.
In this interjection, with all the F's and S's, Johnny tells us he was evicted and he sold his mother's locket for money to enact his plan. He's going to head to Virginia to see if he can find the house for himself. The real house. Before he goes, he says goodbye to everyone at the tattoo shop and gives a letter to his former boss with instructions to give it to Thumper. If he doesn't give it to her, he's going to burn his life down. That's what he tells his boss. He cannot find Lude, but asking around, he learns that Lude is in the hospital. He has been inside his home. He's been out of touch with everybody for months. He learns that Lude is in the hospital. Gdansk Man jumped him after Johnny's run-in with Kyrie at the supermarket. But Lude is in high spirits and says he will sue Gdansk Man when he's out of the hospital. So, this is weird. We randomly see, like, a brief history on what could be the house. There's this guy named Lord Delaware, who was, like, a guy in the Jamestown colony
No.
or something. I don't know who
he was
Delaware
Maryland. Or, Delaware. He's who the state of Delaware is named after.
is. Well, I don't know. Oh, that's what it was. He had a library and wanted the books from the Jamestown colony or some shit. So in the library of Lord Delaware, there was a book that was the journal of these 3 men looking for game outside the Jamestown colony during a really bad winter storm. And in this storm, they mentioned that they found stairs in the wilderness that lead to nothing.
Stairs down into the earth that lead to nowhere.
So that's it. That's all I had. Just some creepy shit. It reminds me of that creepypasta from with the stairs in the national parks.
Mm-hmm.
Karen moves back into the house but finds no sign of the usual oddities that the house provides. Just a normal house. A month passes and she's living there without the kids, and there is no sign of Will or the hallway. The kids are with the grandma. And suddenly she begins hearing Will speak throughout the house and calls Reston. Together, they hear nothing. Reston leaves and a week passes. Karen still hears Will and will smile to herself. And one day, piles of film appear in her room. Just a huge pile of film that Will had clearly used just appear in front of her. And she calls Reston over to drive over, and while she's examining the tapes, we see, like, in the film, we would have seen her, like, looking at the computer, and the shot would have been behind her at a wall with kids' drawings on it, and while the camera is looking at the wall, it just suddenly becomes black, and there's just a black expanse behind her, and she doesn't notice it at first. So, now we're gonna jump back to Will. What did Will see? When he left Reston, he prepared as much as he fucking could. He, like, brought a bike with a trailer, a mountain bike with a trailer, and a bunch of shit, a bunch of water.
He had been presumably preparing for 4 months.
And he has an odometer to see how far he traveled on the bike, and the structure of this chapter is incredible.
Which chapter is this?
I don't know, man.
So here's the picture of, like, when he finally gets in there. This is Exploration 5. He has started mountain biking through the hallways.
Chapter 20.
And he says...
Chapter 20.
Yeah. It says that he starts noticing that he's going downhill, which is where you start to see the chapters do this.
And through the way the chapter is presented, it's like it's an illustration with the words on what he's traveling through.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the next page where it says there's nothing comes up. It's just an endless corridor.
Yeah, I see this. There's Braille here on the page.
It's like an endless corridor. Ceiling drops down where it's like he has to almost crawl.
So he finds himself. Let me go through this. So he finds himself going downhill, and he's like, "Well, that's not good." He turns around and only to find himself going downhill again. No matter which way he travels, it's downhill, so he accepts this and just continues. Eventually, he senses the void ahead of him, and he's like clipping along at like 30 miles per hour at some point, and he senses like this. If I don't stop right now, I'm gonna plummet off the side of this huge cliff. And he manages to stop, crashing the bike and the trailer and messing up his leg really bad. And when he gathers himself, he finds himself in this enormous chamber with a structure ahead of him, a house inside the house. There is like a mini house inside the house he's in.
Right.
And he goes inside this mini house, and of course, it's way bigger inside than it should be. Will travels through all the manner of passages, climbing ladders, crawling through narrow tunnels. The structure of it is all illustrating what he's doing, and it's like you have to turn the book sideways and upside down and shit to continue reading.
Yep.
Until he eventually sees a window, and through the window is a platform, so he decides to climb through. But as he does, and he stands on the other side, the window vanishes, leaving him on a platform being suspended by some unseen force. Trapped on this platform, all there is for him to do is read the one book he brought along with him for this journey, House of Leaves.
What?
So he pulls out the book, House of Leaves, and begins to read it. He lights a flare, but the flare runs out. He has matches, but they only allow for a brief moment of time for him to read in the book. Yet another echo situation. Zampano fucking interjects again to talk about how these matches, like, oh, they could burn for this long, and he must have gotten basically, like, I zoomed and enhanced on the image, and he got these matches from this one pub in England, and blah, 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 who gives a shit? So, they only have a brief amount of time for him to read the book with these matches, so his solution is to tear out the pages that he's already read, and form them into a sort of torch to allow him to continue. Even so, he begins to fall behind and is forced to light the cover on fire to continue reading. Eventually, left with only one match and one page, he lights it and reads, burning the page in the process, leaving him with nothing. His resources gone, all he can do is wait for death. At some point, even the platform he was lying on disappears, and he isn't sure if he's floating or falling into the abyss, and all he can do is wait. He slowly but surely loses his sense of self, and his death begins to set in while he was reading along with it. While we read along with him. Then at the end of the chapter, he exclaims that he can see a light. And during this fight, like, you're just zooming through pages, because it's just page and page and page of, like, 5 words, or less than that. And at one point, he's humming to himself the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He's humming that to himself. And we see that in music notes on the fucking page. And he's just lamenting, we are reading along to a man dying. Man, we have reached the end of my notes. Isn't that exciting? Lude has died. Johnny interjects, and this is where Johnny's narrative becomes the narrative to me. At the end of the fucking book. Lude has died, and Johnny is apparently back from his trip to find the house. He is exceptionally unwell. News of Lude's death has really messed him up. He's staying in a very scummy motel with a hot plate and is barely surviving. Gdansk man sees Johnny on the side of the road and stops his car to assault him. But as he turns his back, Johnny tears into him and claims to the reader to have brutally murdered him and kidnapped Kyrie for very dark purposes. And it's, when we get to this, I'm like, I don't know if I can believe a word he's saying anymore.
Right.
Listen, like, here's a little excerpt that as I'm following along. I have become a creature unstirred by history, no longer moved by the present, just hungry, blind, and at long last, full of mindless wrath. Gdansk man dies. Soon Kyrie will too.
And I don't know, it's a very unreliable narrator, and it's going to further compound as we continue. Later on, he claims to have forgotten what he made up, and what has made up him. Finding pictures of houses that he doesn't remember taking, so he takes the reader with him on a journey through his older journal entries. We go back like a whole year or something.
From October 30th to May 1st.
And we see that Johnny did in fact go to Virginia, yet he found no trace of the house or the Davidsons, and it just kind of became like a little Tory trip for him. While traveling, he decided to go into the institute his mother was kept at, finding it decommissioned. He then visits the site of his childhood home, only to find it gone, which causes a full-blown panic attack in the middle of this construction zone. The next entries are him lying, this straight up. The next entries are him lying in his journal to the reader about meeting 2 friends who are doctors, and they fix all his problems and make him happy with these magical pills. Of course, none of this was true. He gets back to LA in October and calls Thumper, who tells him to come to her home and catch up with them on the next day, but he learns Lude died, and that of course messes him up, so he wasn't able to meet Thumper. Before leaving town, he says that he sells his weapons and sees Thumper. They have a nice farewell, and he learns her real name finally. I don't know if that's true. The next entries are dated in August, the next year, and I think it's all bullshit. All of it. All of these entries, but honestly, I don't know. He arrives in Flagstaff, Arizona, and goes into a bar where he hears lyrics about a 5.5-minute hallway. Interrogating the musicians, he discovers that they have read the first edition of his book on the internet. Everything seems suspiciously happy, and then we jump back to October of the previous year, which is even before the Thumper conversation. Johnny claims to have let Kyrie and Gdansk man go after beating him. He did say he beat the shit out of Gdansk man, but he says he let them go, and I don't know what to believe anymore. He has a revelation about his own 5.5-minute hallway, when his mom was taken away. He says that she never tried to strangle him. He doesn't remember it that way. She remembers him hugging him and kissing his face and whatever, and she then tearfully left. He then tells a story. Here we fucking go, guys. He then tells a story about a mother cradling her dying premature child, saying odd things to it. Like, etch a poo air, and it's in quotes. This story is preceded by a stricken out passage saying, and I quote, "What I'm remembering now." The child dies, but only after the mother tells him that can go, that she is ready for him to leave. And now back to the Navidsons. Karen turns around to see the opening in the wall, hesitating at first. She grabs
hang on.
Yeah.
Okay, page 518. There is something stricken out here, written in very
It's in yellow.
faded yellow text. What does that say?
What I'm remembering now. Except this story, what I'm remembering now, too long from the surface of any dawn, the one doc told me when I was up in Seattle. So shit that he says he's remembering, decides that's not what I want it to say, goes back to the lie about the doctors in Seattle.
Wait, hang on. What?
So in the journal entries, supposedly he says, through September, I visited some friends that I had who both happened to be doctors in Seattle, Washington, because I made my way up there after going to Virginia. Immediately after that, following it says, except for this story too, so skip the cross out, long from the surface of any dawn, the one doc told me when I was in Seattle. So supposedly he's saying, I got this story from the doctors I never met in Seattle, that I made up.
But he struck out what I'm remembering now.
Right.
We'll get to that in a second. And a hot second, listener, if you've made it to fucking 3 hours in. So, we're only 2.5 hours in. Great job, Scott.
Yeah.
This is falling apart quickly.
It's fine.
So, hold on. We're right at the end. So, let's just push forward, and then we're going to talk about some shit. Back to the Navidsons. Karen turns around to see the opening in the wall. Do you remember that? Remember that 100 years ago? She sees the opening in the wall, hesitating at first. She has powerful,
claustrophobic.
claustrophobia. And so she's like, okay, I gotta find my Will. She gets a really powerful flashlight and begins calling for Will before stepping in. She says she saw nothing inside and was terrified. What the camera sees is as soon as she steps in, the blank wall comes back. The black is gone.
The pictures, notably, that were on the wall are also
gone.
I see.
She says she saw nothing inside and was just terrified and kept focusing on finding Will, which eventually she did, as he suddenly appeared before her alive. She held him, and together they were suddenly outside in the front lawn. The house dissolved around them. She says in the last interview that she had closed her eyes and then suddenly they were outside. And the house, it's kind of left up to interpretation that the house might have just vanished in entirety. Then we jump forward a year later, and Will has recovered, though he lost an eye, a hand, and he requires a crutch to move around. Karen got cancer. And that's the end of the book.
Yep.
That's the end.
Yep.
That's the end. John, how are you feeling? How are you feeling right now?
Dude, I mean, I was kind of invested up into about the hour 40 mark.
Yeah.
It's been an hour since then.
I felt like I was way more invested in the mysteries of this house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like interested in Johnny, but then it got so weirdly vague in the subjects that I was interested about. I don't know. Maybe it was the retelling of it. I'm not really sure.
I mean, to be honest,
kind of
there's not a
saying that
lot.
he was unwell or extremely unwell.
Exactly. There's not a lot going on with him other than like, oh man, I can't sleep. I'm having a hard time. And he says that to the reader, and I'm just like, okay, great. He's buying guns. I hope he doesn't do something rash.
Yeah, he doesn't go into a lot of his explanations of his own condition, but you can tell from what he is saying, and in some instances what he's not saying, that he has become obsessive to the point of severe detriment to his own health. Mental, physical, everything.
So, let's truncate this, all right?
Yeah.
We're at the end. Here we are. I see this in 3 ways. Way number 1, and I can go ahead and say, number 3 is my favorite, and I think the one that I'm walking away with. So let's just get there in a second. Number 1, we take everything in this book that isn't explicitly stated as being false at face value.
Mm-hmm.
We assume everyone is telling the truth when they say they are telling the truth. Zampano could be from a different universe, or he's just a guy writing a book. But he exists. And Johnny found his book, and Johnny's mom was in the hospital and was unwell, and all that shit. And in that narrative, the Navidson record is just a neat little thing that happened to Zampano, or it's something he made up, or whatever. And it affects Johnny in such a way that compounds his already unstable mental health and puts him off the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, where we throw in the medium rare, let's call it, of unreliable narrator. Where sometimes we just have to use our own judgment and just see that sometimes people aren't telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
In number 2, this might be what I think is the most likely scenario. Johnny is Zampano. Zampano is just some made-up character that Johnny has. He is writing a book of fiction about Zampano, and I'm willing to take the step and say that he is also just unwell. I'm willing to believe that he is not okay, and I'll even go so far as to say that I highly doubt he was able to bang so many women.
Right.
I think that's just part of the story. To corroborate this, I mentioned a while ago, winding as in, like, to wind something up.
Mm-hmm.
He says that, and then way down in the book, I think it's while Zampano was talking about theories, Zampano uses the exact same wording. Wind as in to wind something up.
Oh, so you're saying it's like a slip.
It's like a slip.
That Johnny is writing both sections, and he's trying to have 2 distinct voices between the two, but he slips that one time.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is interesting. I also had a note about this.
Yeah.
I wrote, I find it odd that Johnny is doing actual scholarship and citing his sources. And then an addendum to that, how much of Johnny is his own voice and how much of it is Danielewski? And I also noticed that the longer it went, Johnny started to write more like Zampano did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, is that intentional or is that unintentional because the author isn't aware of his voice slipping into Zampano and Johnny's? But you're saying it might be intentional that his voice is slipping into both because they're not 2 separate characters.
Well, I think, given the trail you're going down right now, I might be about to blow your fucking mind. Number 3.
Okay.
Number 3 is my favorite, and it's the one that I'm walking away with. This is what the book was to me. I think everything is Johnny's mom. I think Johnny's mom is not dead and did not have a child. The story that Johnny tells, what I'm remembering now, is her remembering Johnny's stillborn death.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
And we see that in the Whale's Toe letters, Johnny's mom is genuinely brilliant. She is throwing out all these different languages, citing all these different poems and shit. She knows so much shit. And while I was reading it, I'm like, man, it sounds like Zampano wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did. I think she is everybody. And I think, in her weird sexualization of the son that doesn't exist, she had her son who didn't get a chance to live go on this whole journey. And it turned into this self-deprecating thing of, because I wasn't there for him, because I couldn't raise him, he is just as bad off as I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got from it.
Oh.
I didn't get that, but I see it now, and I'm like, that answers so much. Because I was always in the camp that none of it was real from the beginning. I just didn't get to the mother part.
I now direct you to the check mark in the SOS. Why was there a check mark? Who was that check mark for, other than
Her.
the mom that apparently still lives?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck. Okay.
I'm just speechless here. I'm trying to go through this. I'm that was just such a subtle thing right here. Page 518. What I'm remembering now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and another thing, there are little hints of this. I wasn't sure. I didn't make a note about this because I wasn't sure how much credence I would give it at the end, but I might as well throw it in. So, Tom gives Daisy, before everything goes to shit, and when Tom first shows up, he gives Daisy a dollhouse, and with it to go with it a Spanish doll that she can play with in the house. And they make a point to say that he gave her a Spanish doll. In fact, they bring it up a couple times that she's playing with her Spanish doll.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny's mom, in the Whale's Toe letters, she calls herself a Spanish doll twice.
Right.
Mm.
Right, she does. I remember that.
And I don't know. I don't know. So in my universe, she is very unwell and did a crazy person thing at the Whale's Toe Institute, assuming it's even real, and just made this whole narrative of the son that never got a chance to live.
Notably, one of the things that they talk about is that supposedly the Whale's Toe letters exist and were being sent to Johnny, and he provided them to the editors to add to the end. But here's the thing. Johnny explicitly spells out in that section at the end that he never kept any of the letters from his mother.
Wait, I didn't catch that. When?
I think it's somewhere in there, because he's talking about that his mother only kept the one letter
Right.
that she wrote him, or that he wrote her. And he says that he had a falling out with his mother, and it was easier to just resent her, so he never ended up keeping the letters that she wrote him. Because he's not sentimental like that, the only thing he ever kept from her was the locket.
Interesting.
Which is a complete discrepancy that cannot be reconciled in any way.
Have you read the Whale's Toe part, Cody?
I have not.
You're gonna want to flip through that. Go to page, 600 or something.
Right. There's a lot of them.
There's a part where it just she is in the lowest dip of her mental health, and we go on that journey
Sweet
with her.
Johnny. Sweet Johnny, forgive me. Yeah.
She's having this huge, psychotic break where she sees, assuming that it's all real, which I think she thinks it is, in my universe, she thinks it's all real, and she doesn't get a letter back from Johnny and thinks, oh my god, he's blaming me for causing the scars on his arms, or he's blaming me for strangling him that one time. I'm sorry. I thought I was just doing you a favor, Johnny. I just wanted to give you that one last final gift that everyone searches for in the form of her killing him. And it's just really fucked up. And at one point, there's a letter where she precedes it with the check mark. Hey, leave a check mark in this. I'm going to have a secret message in the next one. Read the top letter, read the first letter of each word that I post, and then put it together. And in that, if you do that, which I fucking did, she goes on about how she's being sexually assaulted in this facility, and going on about how this new director, who has replaced the old director of the facility, is awful to her and so mean and rude and terrible. But then in a later one, she realizes there never was a new director. It's been the old one the whole time. And I just didn't realize it. But I don't know. I don't know what's real. And another weird thing is in the coded letter that talked about the sexual assault, there's another code that she didn't mention that I found. I'm not some super sleuth or something. It's just another series of capitalized letters.
Mm-hmm.
And I read them, and they just spell out, a face in the cloud, no trace in the crowd.
Is that
I
a
don't know
song
what
lyric?
the fuck that is. It sounds like a song lyric. I don't know. I don't know what it is, Kyle.
Okay, a face in the cloud. What was it?
No trace in the crowd.
Okay, I'm just gonna Google this real quick.
It's probably going to find House of Leaves stuff.
Maybe. Okay.
I specifically didn't look it up because I was worried about... I had forgotten this even happened until now. And I specifically didn't look it up because I was worried about it being important and it spoiling something because I found it in the middle of reading.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm getting fucking Reddit threads and forum posts of people trying to figure out what the fuck it means.
It sounds like a song lyric. So maybe it's from some poem. That's another thing. Apparently Johnny, it doesn't matter, but Johnny added all these addendums to the back of the book in the appendices and shit, and one of them is the Pelican poems, where he
Yeah.
traveled the Europe with a pelican pin and just wrote a bunch of poems and called himself Pelican, I guess. I don't know. But his mom references that, and that's like he doesn't talk about it at all. He doesn't talk about the Pelican poems at all. There's one section in the Labyrinth, I think, where it mentions, like, the editors go to see the Pelican poems, but I did, and it's the kind of thing I wish Chris was here for, because he likes poems, and he knows what to talk about with poems, but I don't fucking know. I read all the poems. I don't know anything about them. It means nothing to me. It's just word salad. But I digress. We didn't even talk really about the Minotaur. For whatever reason that I can't even suss out, maybe just to be spooky, Zampano struck out every mention of the Minotaur that he had already put in there. Something about it upset him.
And interestingly enough, other people in the narrative liken the entity that for more or less is indeterminate if that actually exists inside the house to the Minotaur on multiple occasions, but they don't get taken out. And these are the critics that are discussing the video.
I don't know.
Well, and there's something else in here. It goes back to what you were saying about how the story really starts to break down. There is a chapter titled The Minotaur, and it's crossed out, and it's given a footnote.
Yep.
I think it's footnote 123.
Yep.
123 is like
30 pages.
chapters before.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
And on top of that, none of the other chapters have a chapter heading. They don't have a title.
Mm-hmm. Well, they do.
But they're
just
listed
not...
after the book is done.
Yeah. Why?
So if you got this far into the podcast, I want to suck your cock. I want to suck it. I appreciate you listening. We are 3 hours deep almost, and I feel great.
I will say, I legitimately, when we were talking about the dog, I was legitimately sick. I was like, I need to stop.
When I was reading about that scene, it like got me suddenly. Like, it was like a jump scare almost, where I knew it was like the cheesy, dumb, slow building violin note that you see in shitty horror movies nowadays. And it was like that happening. And I'm like, something bad is about to happen. And I don't even know what it could possibly be. And then, like a gut punch, dog is dead. An inhuman monster killed it. And I don't know what to think about that. And I was just scared. And I had like a genuine, I'll call it a near nightmare about it the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I won't lie. Cody, when you're editing this, you're gonna hear some sniffles that Discord didn't pick up.
Aww.
Because today was already a tough day for me.
Yeah.
Because today, 7 minutes ago, as of time of recording, would have been Dexter's birthday.
Ripping pepperonis.
Yeah.
He's got plenty of pepperonis where he is, John.
It's I'm sufficiently spooked.
Yeah.
Like, I want to keep asking questions, but I feel like my curiosity it will be punished in some way or will be detrimental.
That's the thing. Like, I still have so many questions, and at this stage, I don't want them answered. In part because I am so outraged at the book for just existing. I don't want it to answer the questions it's forcing me to ask. But I also am in that headspace where it's like, there is no answer that would be satisfying. So I just want to drop it.
I will say, for as cliche as an ending as it might be, the whole book being in Johnny's mother's head is a pretty good twist.
That's just what I picked up on. I don't know if that's the case, but that's what I'm taking away from it.
I can forgive that.
I will accept that because I was already in that kind of part where it's like, nothing here is real. Like, none of it makes any kind of sense. I am already on board with everything's a fabrication.
And the whole preamble to that one little strucken out passage of what I'm remembering now is just a whole load of horse shit. Him, like, coming up with this stuff about going to doctors in Seattle, and then, like, oh, everything's happy and nice. He even gets a new dog friend, a husky, that, like, and he gets cheap soup and beer, and he can drink and have fun, and he's homeless, and he's just a wanderer, in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he's warm at night and he doesn't shiver and scream in his sleep. And then we just go right back to October 31st, Lude's dead. And
Yeah.
it's just like priming me to think this is horseshit.
Yep. Exactly.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm wrapping the podcast up here.
No.
It's been a bit short. But hey, if we could last for like a few more. Nah, I'm just kidding. This is great.
We're gonna keep talking after we're done recording.
I feel great. I feel like I just
you guys will be
pissed all of my bladder away. I feel empty.
I will say my headache's gone.
I feel good.
I mean, you've been holding that piss for like a month.
I
and
know
a half.
I'm not shaking anymore like I was before the podcast started. I actually feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for Johnny. I also have a really hard time sleeping.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that, all of that certainly feels to me like someone writing from experience of an incredibly horrible place.
And if not, it was very convincing.
Yeah.
As much as this book bothers me in ways that I can't fully describe, it really does warm my heart that you love it so much, Scott.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for you.
Well, it reminds me of, I think this was a while ago, I was talking to you, Cody, it might have been Chris, where I think I had a really good philosophy with this book, where I just kind of let it take me by the hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me down its passages and its labyrinths, and I got at the end, and I felt it was very beautiful.
I'm glad.
And I feel like good. I feel good for having got to the end, and it feels like my interpretation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. And listeners at home.
I love talking about it. I dislike the book in a way that is very passionate, and I don't know how to describe it. I don't like the book. I viscerally hate this book. But I would never say that it is a bad book and that you shouldn't necessarily read it. I won't recommend it to somebody except the person who I'm about to go throw it at.
Right.
I have a lot of emotions about this book. It's very mixed. It tends towards the negative. I'm happy we did this.
Also,
though.
can we get a hand for Chris? Good job.
Yeah,
Chris.
that took some real strength right there.
More strength than I had.
I'm just gonna, here we go. I'm ending it for real. If you got this far, please leave a comment. Tell us if you've read the book and if, like, what you think about our interpretation of it. Please, I would love that. If not, whatever. But either way, I love you for making it this far.
If you found anything that they did not talk about,
Yeah, absolutely.
Please add it up.
Absolutely.
Please have your discussion in the comments. We will be watching.
And we'll be back to our regularly scheduled bullshit next week.
Right.
Have a great night, everybody.
Farewell.
Bye.